From his conversation with Jessica, Fang Qi sensed that this land was so vast that even the forces behind her hadn't been able to explore the whole continent. From the information that she revealed, Fang Qi had the vague feeling that ancient existences like gods existed in this world. Although Jessica hadn't seen them with her own eyes, their existence was proved by many prophecies and miracles that happened in the past countless years. Also, the spiritual patterns between their eyebrows were distinct evidence since these patterns were condensed from godly power. With these patterns, they could borrow power from the gods and use godly spiritual spells. When two opponents of the same realm battled, with one being an ordinary cultivator or warrior who used ordinary spiritual essence and warrior qi and the other being someone who could activate such horrifying power, it was obvious who would win. It wasn't a battle between rivals of the same level. It was one of the reasons why they looked down on the cultivators of the spiritual state and dared to be arrogant. Fang Qi had defeated them since he had the experience of countless battles. At least his game character had absorbed most of the power of the demons. After he achieved complete synchronization with the character, he could overpower his three opponents in terms of granular control of his energy. Combined with the great power of evil sword apophyes and other equipment that offered great strength, he could fight them 1 versus 3. If Mr. Fang had been a newbie soul bender, he would have been defeated without a doubt. Among these outlanders, Carl was the strongest, but he was only a vanguard general. Fang Qi could imagine the great power of the Judgment Godly Palace, the force behind them. Fortunately, Mr. Fang was here to open a shop, and he wasn't an invader who would arrogantly claim to destroy this world. Therefore, he wasn't worried that someone would come to him and beat him senseless like what he did to the 3 outlanders. Verb. Jessica tossed down the broom and belched uncontrollably with a bottle of Coke in her hand. Ugh! I drank a whole bottle already? Get me a bottle of iced red tea. Then, she took out a strange purple crystal and paid for it. After I return, I'll capture this despicable shop owner and force him to make red iced tea for us each day. Jessica said with a snort. Her lips curved up when she imagined the scene in which Mr. Fang served her tea and massaged her back. Her mood lightened at the thought. We must be cautious, there are many traps and mechanisms in the shop. Kevin said in a low voice, while we are here, we can gather more information and see what powerful and mysterious force is behind this shop. Obviously, he remembered his failure to escape from the window and door after trying to break them for a whole night, and thus he was very cautious. On the other hand, they didn't want people to know about their humiliating experience, so they considered how to negotiate their release with Mr. Fang while gathering information about the shop. We must prepare for the invasion of the Outlanders. Gu Tingyun looked grim. Since we came to their world through the heavenly abyss sea, they can one day go to our spiritual state through the same portal. If that happens, the spiritual state will be in danger. Fang Qi turned serious at this moment as well since he had lived in the deserted sea realm for a long time and could be considered as half a native. We must get prepared. Fang Qi now clearly understood that the invaders came from the force called the Judgment Godly Palace. Although he didn't know the status of this force in the whole continent, he knew that it didn't represent all the forces on this land. Of course, there might be other forces coinciding with the Judgment Godly Palace in terms of missions and strategies, which was a factor that Fang Qi must put into consideration. I plan to return to the spiritual state today and begin the preparations. What's your plan, Mr. Fang? Gu Tingyun didn't plan to drag this on. I plan to find a peaceful spot to open a branch shop while experiencing the life and customs in this place. I'll keep you guys informed and message you when I detect something, Fang Qi said. Okay. Sounds good. In fact, under the suppression of the powerful upper realm, the fates of the cultivators and warriors in places such as the spiritual state, deserted sea realm, and ultimate west realm didn't depend on Fang Qi but themselves. Fang Qi alone couldn't determine their fates. After all, Jessica was correct in one thing, the powerful preyed on the weak, and only the fittest would survive. One had to admit that some things could unite all people. Hatred and conflict of interests were nothing in front of such issues. The cultivators of Half City were not good friends with their counterparts in the big factions of the Morning Star Sea realm, but now they had to work together and be cooperative on the surface. Dajin and the Wu Vidaist alliance had been enemies with the Yundian Upper Realm and the two Saint factions respectively, but none of them had conflicts with the cultivators of spiritual state. The two figures hidden in black robes were now sitting in a corner of the shop. "Should we, of course," the big man wearing a black cloak said bleakly while he gazed at the jade tablet engraved with two characters Luotian in his hand. "Time flows by slowly, and the past feels like a dream. I hope your immortal souls will bless us and help us obtain victory this time. So many years have passed. Now, we are going to face the enemies that they had once faced. How is the demonic energy in your body?" the black-robed man asked in a low voice. The woman frowned slightly and replied, "I can hear the demons' whispers occasionally, just like how it is in that world, the world in the game. The power contained in this advancement contract is perfect. Now I have the strength of stigmata, and I'm not afraid of demons. Besides, I think I can condense a seed for demonic energy. With aid from that world, I think you can soon obtain your advancement as well. With this power, perhaps awakening is no longer so far away from us. Then, let's go to that world and study it to obtain more inspirations. Let's use up the fatigue points and then join their discussions. Let's go. If I get a piece of good equipment, I'll treat you to Coke. Should we reinforce the equipment to level 14? I remember that the prize coupon doesn't have a restriction on the reinforcement levels. My goodness! You're right. We can't stop at 14. We must make it to 20. Sir. Deposit more money in my card. Only on a solid foundation can tall buildings stand still. Therefore, don't be surprised if you see someone knocking down a huge dragon with a rusty iron sword or someone easily battling a heavily armored fighter with bare fists. It was because these people were truly grandmasters. If you're confident in your strength, you can pick up a tree branch from the ground and make it the best weapon in the world. Regardless of where they were, what nation they were in, what kind of power they used, and how talented they were, cultivators and warriors must put great efforts in the training of basic skills. Even on this land that was rumored to have gods, people believed that basic skills were important. In fact, the people here put even more emphasis in basic skill training than anywhere else that Fang Qi had been to. Big and small nations dotted the land like dazzling stars in the sky or precious stones in a mine, making it look like that the continent was wearing a fancy robe. Among all the nations, the Morning Light Empire that had the surging Kanglan River and misty Union Spring, which symbolized life, was the most beautiful pearl on this continent. This beautiful and rich nation enjoyed the reputation of the nation of skills. This nation put the greatest emphasis on fundamental skills. Although other nations valued fundamental skills as well, the people in this nation put much more time and energy in basic training than the warriors and mages of other nations. They had complete martial Dao mystical realms and spiritual spells mystical realms for not only junior warriors and mages but masters as well. The latter group came into these realms to do some special training with suppressed cultivation strengths. Perhaps before entering these mystical realms, many people had the misunderstanding that the basic cultivation mystic realms were only useful to beginners and could be discarded after one's cultivation strength grew higher. However, after entering these realms, the foreigners who came here to cultivate would soon change their minds. These realms welcomed warriors and mages from all places. If you were lucky, you might even encounter the legendary elves in this nation. These cultivation mystical realms were treasures of the city which was situated by Kanglan River. People passing this area could hear groups of warriors and 2 or 3 discussing combat techniques. With these techniques, they battled with dangerous magical beasts, hunted for top-quality fur and higher-level magical beast crystals, which was the livelihood for many people. These realms were not open 24 hours per day. During the night, even the warriors and mages enthralled by these realms were reluctant to disturb the tranquil atmosphere of this city. On the gravel-paved streets of this ancient European-style city thronged crowds from all over the world. This was a perfect capture of the scenery of this city. These cultivation mystical realms all belonged to the Alchemist Union, and they had the highest travel flow. Several young men and women with blonde or brown hair had just finished cultivation. While wiping sweat off his foreheads, an innocent-looking young man with freckles was in high spirits. Did you know? Earlier in the cultivation mystical realm, I defeated a grey wolf which was a level 2 magical beast alone. A level 2 magical beast. It seems that my scores this term will be beyond outstanding. I think I can adventure into the Sunset Forest, he said excitedly. It was clear that these young people were very interested in unknown and novel stuff. They were drawn toward it whenever they heard about mercenaries coming back from the Sunset Forest with bags full of magical beast furs, alchemical herbs, and rare minerals. Grey wolves appear in groups inside the Sunset Forest. I hope you won't wet your pants if you encounter them, a brown-haired young man teased him. Right. It's said that some senior students sneaked into the Sunset Forest and encountered dozens of grey wolves. If a group of mercenaries didn't pass by, they wouldn't have made it back. Is it really so horrid? Through the door of the shop, Fang Qi could see a few Oriental people with black hair and dark eyes mingling in the crowds. It was said that they came from another nation in the distant east. Of course, Fang Qi used these words to describe his own background as well. The small shop had a brand new and spotless outlook. With only about 100 computers, the shop was neat and quiet. Outside the shop was a round intersection connecting streets with bustling crowds. Through the door, Fang Qi could see the huge traffic and the giant flower bed in the center of the intersection. On the giant flower bed was a huge statue of a tall man lifting a long sword. It was a busy area that was good for business. To Fang Qi's surprise, after he opened the shop, the prize he got was the game, Resident Evil 2. He thought it through after a moment of consideration. After all, most people in this world were ordinary, and the power of crowds couldn't be underestimated. To spread the internet all over the world, it wouldn't be wise if the shop only provided things that interested the few high-level warriors and grandmasters. He would have to nurture the young flowers with the very basic skills. Yes, nurture. Mr. Fang thought that this was a good word to describe what he would do. In the past, whenever he opened a new shop, there would be all the movies and TV series. But this time, the new shop had only one movie, Resident Evil 2. Together with the game, the shop offered only 2 items. Origins Internet Club? What a strange name. Look. There's a new shop here. When did it open? As usual, most people would show interest in a shop that they didn't know anything about. Driven by curiosity, these young people walked into the shop to see what business the shop was running. Having just come out of a cultivation mystical realm, these young people walked into the shop and found that the presence inside was mystical and totally different from other shops. Even though the plants and decorations inside the shop matched the city's style, the square-shaped objects that looked like magic items gave them a novel feeling. On the counter hung the certificate from the Alchemist Union and the business certificate. Everything showed that it was a legal and formal business. On the small blackboard was written, Resident Evil 2 Cultivation Mystical Realm, 10 magic crystals for activation. Resident Evil 2 Movie, 8 magic crystals for activation. Underneath were the prices of items such as iced red tea and Coke. Computer time is 2 magic crystals per hour. Resident Evil Cultivation Mystical Realm. They looked baffled. What kind of cultivation mystical realm is this? We've just come out from the Sunset Forest mystic realm of Alchemist Union after killing a grey wolf. Don't try to fool me. What is this thing? The blonde warrior pointed at the shop and said in resentment, I mean that Oriental man who came from nowhere. Ah! The short man snickered and dragged on his voice as he said flippantly, an Oriental man? The one who went to the Alchemist Union this morning? Did he offend you? This guy doesn't know his limits. He set several new records in the low-level mystic realms. The blond man carrying the big sword looked at the shop sulkily and said, I wonder which wealthy family he comes from. He dares to open a cultivation mystic realm in this place. His moves seem to be quite fancy, and I heard that Fiery Rose in the Union is fond of him. I remember that you had set some of the records he broke, right? Crete? He doesn't have any respect for his seniors, which is indeed infuriating. Humph. He is showing off his combat techniques blatantly since he isn't weak. Should we, the short one whispered, give this foreigner a lesson? A few customers went in. Let's frighten them out of the shop. Ruin his reputation. Good idea. Give him a taste of the power of our Golden Sunlight mercenary group. Meanwhile, in Fang Qi's shop, what is this Resident Evil 2 cultivation mystical realm? The brown-haired young man with freckles looked around the shop curiously and said, This shop looks strange, so expensive. The green-eyed girl beside him exclaimed when she saw the prices. 2 magic crystals for 1 hour. What were magic crystals? They were crystals condensed from the energy in magical beasts' bodies. Only level 2 magical beasts could have a low chance of producing the lowest level magic crystals, which made these crystals very valuable. With its pure energy, 1 magic crystal was equal to 10 unpurified magic ores. Obviously, this price was higher than that of ordinary cultivation mystical realms. In this nation, which put great importance on combat techniques, cultivation mystical realms were available to most disciples. These mystic realms were low-leveled and easy to make. As the technology matured, they were affordable to most disciples who intended to become warriors and mages. However, this new shop was even more expensive than the low-level cultivation mystical realm built by people such as the vice president of the Morning Light Empire branch of Alchemist Union. The latter had been in business in the city for many years. So expensive. They had wanted to try it, but they got indignant seeing the high prices. Let's go, the green-haired girl said, it's so expensive. I hope the shop owner lives his life with his magic crystals. With a pout, she went out of the shop before others. Is this cultivation mystical realm more powerful than the Sunset Forest? The freckled young man followed her out. When they looked around, they saw many people gathering before the shop. I heard that this shop offended the Golden Sunlight mercenary group. Some spellcasters wearing black cloaks stood outside the shop. He's new to the city, but he has a talent for offending people. He can mess with many people, but why did he choose them? He's just a little guy, do you really want to play pranks on him? Behind the blonde man named Crete stood a woman who was wearing a black mage cloak, and she asked with a playful smile on her face. I just want to play with him. The blonde man also had a playful and teasing smile on his face. Okay then. A short dark red magic staff slid out of the woman's sleeve. With a light wave of the magic staff, the fountain that was shooting out water toward the flower bed dashed toward Fang Qi's shop. Surprisingly, the water from the fountain turned colorful like paints. In the blink of an eye, the snow-white walls of Fang Qi's shop were dyed in many colors, and the shop front looked like a wet chicken that was just taken out of a bucket of paint. The warriors who were about to enter the shop to check it out paused their steps. Ha 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 ha, the crowd instantly laughed. However, in the next instant, the pedestrians on the street, including the blonde warrior Crete and that woman, stopped laughing. The place fell silent. They saw the paint slide down from the walls and turn fainter until it became thin streams of water. More surprising was that the water seemed to give a shower to the small building, turning the slightly yellowed walls pristine white. With the remaining dust washed off, the tiles on the ceiling looked spotless and translucent. Try again. Put more effort in it. I just don't believe it. When the water sprayed to the building, the audience widened their eyes. The water drops turned into white mist as if they were evaporated by some unknown heat source, engulfing the small shop in an ethereal white fog. This place looked like a shop of the immortals. Awesome, excellent. The young people who had just come out of the shop stood outside and exclaimed with hands covering their mouths, and disbelief appeared in their eyes. Not only the blonde man but the woman who cast the spell froze. What is going on? Mr. Fang frowned and murmured, "What's happening outside?" He strode out of the door. "He's coming out. Get ready. This time, we must humiliate him in front of everyone. Don't worry. I set up a small spiritual spell on the ground. It will be great to see so many people witness his humiliation." At this moment, the door of the shop opened, and a young man flew out stepping on a silver sword beam. With mist surrounding the shop, the figure flying out while stepping on the sword beam looked like an immortal to the people outside the door. "Hello, everyone." Mr. Fang greeted them friendly. "Ah, this oriental man is dashing. Wow! Cool." All the people of the upper realm who were standing on the street were stupefied by the sight. "Joseph." The young people who had planned to leave due to the high prices said, "CIA, shall we go back and try it?" "Ah. The shop owner is so cool." The girl with green hair and green eyes had stars in her eyes. "Let's go and try the new mystic realm in the shop." "Well, should we go in and have a look?" The mages who were here to watch the drama at the door hesitated for a second before walking into the shop. "Let's go as well." Some warriors carrying heavy weapons walked into the shop too. "Ugh." The blonde man carrying the big sword was silent. The short man stammered, The female mage didn't say anything. Silence fell on them. After a long while, they scratched their heads. "Hee hee, ha ha ha, hi hi hey." This girl looked to be about 19 years old. The skin revealed by her sleeveless ice blue long dress was whiter than snow. With her hands in silk gloves and resting on her lap, she looked dignified and elegant like a statue of a goddess. With her youthful looks, it was hard to connect her to that legendary existence. "Yes." Her gaze lowered to him coldly. The guard immediately answered, "The information from the Judgment Godly Palace shows that the vanguard general and army that they sent to attack that plane seemed to have been captured." "Oh? Hee hee. In a barbaric plane." At this moment, the existence sitting on the throne showed some interest. The Judgment Godly Palace seemed to have existed on this land for a long, long time. Their presences could be seen everywhere in this world. They spread their beliefs all over the world. In fact, they had members inside many nations. It was one of the largest powerhouses in the complicated power system on this continent. A man wore a milky white priest robe decorated with the pattern of a strange hexagonal flame. A huge dragon with crystal-like silver scales lay beside him. Sitting on the highest position in the grand hall, his head was on the same level of the huge dragon's head, looking down at the mortals like a god. The presence that he emitted was so hot that it could suffocate anyone who came close to him. In contrast, his eyes were as cold as ice. "God said that flames will burn up all sins," he said slowly. According to the records in the godly palace, this man who looked to be about 30 years old with dazzling handsome facial features had once served the god. God said that anyone who betrays the glories of God will be judged and punished. Such an existence stood at the top of the continent. Karl and his two companions hadn't expected that Judgment Godly Palace would know about their capture so soon. After all, as the Flame Inquisitor, he had his own means and channels that were unknown to others. The Vanguard General and his two companions are elites of the Godly Palace. 2 rows of people stood neatly before the Flame Inquisitor. The people in one row wore silver armor while the people in the other row wore white priest robes. Only a handful of people standing in the very front wore red robes and red armor, a sharp contrast from the rest. Each of them emitted a horrifying presence. The further ahead they stood, the greater the presence they emitted. Their expressions were cold, but their eyes had heat in them. "I'm sad that some of our people have discarded their godly patterns and betrayed the glory of God. Please release the holy flames and purge their sins." One white-robed priest bowed and said. They talked as if they could decide people's lives with one word. "No," the white-robed man who looked as holy as a god said, "I think they only submitted and behaved against the law due to suppression, they still have a chance for redemption." The people who dragged them down should be purged by the holy flame, the haughty, godlike man said. I'm willing to lead the godly punishment army to execute the godly punishment. This time, the man standing in the foremost opened his mouth and spoke. He wore bright red armor engraved with a golden hexagonal flame pattern, and in the center of the flame was a holy hammer. Only 6 people in the Grand Hall wore such armor. They were members of the Judgment Knight Legion. Each of them possessed great strength unimaginable to mortals. No. You shouldn't have to undertake such a trivial mission, the existence sitting on the high pedestal said calmly. It's only a small task to destroy a barbaric plane. A man wearing a golden robe walked up. I think the Thornflower family and Flamebird family who serve our god are willing to do the job. Sitting on the extremely tall pedestal, the Flame Inquisitor nodded slightly. The people who lured God's children and made them fall should be punished most severely. Let that person of the Darkwing Knight Legion do the job. Achoo! Mr. Fang suddenly sneezed and thought, who's thinking of me? At this moment, he was managing the new shop. With all his attention focused on how to nurture the new flowers, he was oblivious to the hidden currents after having a new goal. He had no idea what was going on. Wow! The young people had gotten online, and they found that the computers in the shop were totally different from their experience in the traditional cultivation mystical realms. Are these magical items made by the Oriental spellcasters? The freckled young man was Joseph, and the green-haired and green-eyed girl was CIA. It was evident that they were amazed by these Oriental-style magic items. In fact, hand-to-hand combat techniques were not low-level skills. They were only weak when used by weak people. There were differences between techniques, large differences. However, the simplest fundamental techniques usually contained the greatest potential and variations. The monster systems in Resident Evil 2 was larger and more complicated than that in Resident Evil 1. Since the game simulated the real world, even soldiers of special forces couldn't battle with such monsters with their bodies if they didn't have powerful close-range combat techniques. The system remake of Resident Evil 2 was different from Resident Evil 1. It had 3 difficulty levels for players to choose, and each level required different levels of combat techniques. In the basic difficulty, the players could choose Leon and Claire. At this stage, Leon was only a new recruit in terms of combat techniques. Although Claire had learned some combat techniques and shooting skills from Chris, she was still a university student and not proficient with these skills. In the challenge difficulty, the players could choose Chris and Ada whose strengths didn't need more description. In the ultimate difficulty, the players were equipped with only 1 dagger and 3 herbs. If you passed this difficulty, you probably would know the true meaning of granular control. In fact, they had begun to think and tried to create this spiritual spell as early as when they first saw the gauze guns. With the spiritual spell of transforming lightning into threads, they could study the coil guns. Of course, they did more than discussing it. For example, at this moment, Tianji sat on the couch with a bowl of instant noodles in one hand and a pink iPhone communication jade in the other. It still had the face of a cute cat printed on the back. Ding dong! Hey, the visual that the communication jade showed was a flat-chested girl humming a song, and the title was A Certain Scientific Railgun. Master, what are you watching? It's a story about a girl firing the railgun. Since she could only purchase the framework of some spiritual spells in Xone after watching this, she had to watch it and enjoy it. During breakfast, she watched 1 episode of this anime with her disciples. Perhaps only when they ate instant noodles in the shop could they enjoy a moment of peace. After all, they were threatened by the permanent existences from that unknown world. My job is to protect the continent. How can I be so lazy and idle here? Ah! The shop released a new game. What new game? Tianji immediately turned her head to the voice. Resident Evil 2. Tianji sat back down while pouting. Resident Evil 2? What is fun about that? It has a low power system. Anyway, I can't really go and try to develop the T-virus and toss it into the home of the Outlanders, right? Also, it is impossible to produce such a thing. I'm better off watching my Railgun Girl anime. While watching the anime on a couch, she sent a message to Mr. Fang on QQ. Sir, how come you released this new game? Husky's disdainful face, Mr. Fang replied. Why don't you play it? Su Tianji asked, strange. Why should I? Sitting in the new shop, Mr. Fang chose a meme from the QQ meme collection and sent it to her. Do you want to understand the meaning of life? Do you want to live for real? Under the question were two options. The first was yes, and the second was okay. Su Tianji stared at the screen in a daze. She almost spat out a mouthful of blood onto the screen, and she felt frustrated and wanted to beat up Mr. Fang. How can I choose from these two options? Do you want to hear a story? Mr. Fang asked. Ugh! A story? It felt like an adult was trying to calm down a child. Su Tianji thought for a second and replied, a fairy, will give you face and listen to you. Then, Mr. Fang told her about a world named Terror Infinity. After watching The Matrix, Su Tianji didn't find the weird concept of Terror Infinity very hard to understand. Oh! Hearing only part of it, Su Tianji jumped up and asked, do you mean that I can open the, genetic lock if I play Resident Evil 2? You can only do it in the ultimate state, Mr. Fang added. Quickly turning off her communication jade, Su Tianji got up and murmured, we can practice ultimate movements and techniques in Resident Evil? I'm going to play it. She went online cheerfully. Mr. Fang froze. I was only telling a story. I didn't say that it was real. Hey! Hey! How come you're playing Resident Evil? In the group for chat for the Super Railgun, the members were puzzled when Su Tianji announced that she would try Resident Evil 2. This game couldn't meet the high demands of these grand cultivators and high-level warriors. It was for the low-level young people to play. Then, Su Tianji posted a meme in the group. Do you want to understand the meaning of life? Do you want to live for real? Then, she told them about Terror Infinity. *CK. Such a thing exists. Me. I want to play it, too. A member with the profile picture of a big white deer had slipped into the group. The deer wanted to learn the railgun spiritual spell? And it even wanted to open the genetic lock? It definitely lacked a good understanding of itself. I want to play it too. He, a loli joined the fun as well. Compared to the players in the old shops who lacked an understanding of themselves, the players in the new shop were much better. Not needing Mr. Fang to tell them a story about life's meaning, these people in this world just paid and entered the game. Oh! This cultivation mystical realm is so different. The brown-haired young man yelled, I've turned into another man. My name is Leon. Ah! The young girl with green hair also exclaimed, I'm Claire, I have matured. Can I drink a bit of wine now? The blonde man named Big Sword Crete, who had caused trouble outside the shop, entered the game as well. What good stuff can this small shop have? It must be a basic mystical realm of the lowest level. Watch me. I'll kill all the beasts in the realm and break all the records in the shop. After entering the game, the players saw a city engulfed in a weird atmosphere and darkness. The prosperous city with skyscrapers and shops didn't even have a single light on. It was really strange. Having just graduated from the police academy, Leon drove to the police office on his first day of work. This mystical realm looks weird. While watching the opening cinematics, the Outlanders put down their virtual reality headsets and exchanged a look. They all sensed the creepy atmosphere in the game. After putting virtual reality headsets back onto their heads, they seemed to hear staggering steps in the darkness. At this moment, they officially entered the game. Where's my chi? Where's my power? How come I turn into an ordinary person? The blonde mercenary Crete yelled when he saw humans with dirty blood on their pale faces staggering toward him. *CK off. You damn wastrels! Crete quickly kicked the first zombie on the chest. However, he didn't notice that the corpse lying on the ground suddenly opened its eyes. During the interlude cinematics, Leon had stopped by this corpse to check it. Ah! It bit my leg. How can this person be biting other people? Meanwhile, screams sounded in the shop. How come this thing can't be killed? Ah! Blood was everywhere on the screen. After exiting the virtual reality mode, these people stared at the screen and watched as the bodies of their game characters were eaten by the zombies. This fear made their hair stand on end. On this day, these outlanders were struck by the fear of being overwhelmed by zombies. What's this mystical realm? This mystical realm is not for cultivation, it's used to scare people. The mercenaries complained loudly. After all, they had fought countless battles. If they were given a bit of their cultivation strength, they would be killing machines in the game. The mages shared this thought. If we can cast a spiritual spell in the game, even a small fireball will work. However, they couldn't use any of their strength. The mercenaries yelled, "It's despicable to increase the difficulty by suppressing our strength. Besides, the monsters in there can't be killed." Crete yelled, "After I shattered its chest with land shatter, the combat technique that he used to kick the zombie, it didn't die. It could still bite people as if nothing happened. How can such monsters exist in the world?" Different from Resident Evil 1, almost no one survived in the entire city. In Resident Evil 2, the zombies were everywhere. In Resident Evil 1, the players would only encounter one zombie at the beginning. I dare to bet that no one can last more than 1 minute with these monsters. Crete said as his face turned red in agitation. While he said that, he heard an exclamation, "Wow! Is this a magical firearm? Awesome!" The mercenaries looked back and saw the young people who had put down their virtual reality headsets in fear now gather around the girl named CIA. She controlled Claire, who was holding an object that looked like a magical firearm. Crack! 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 Then, she quickly ran out. The mercenaries exchanged a look and wondered, this mystical realm can be like this? Confident in their own strengths, the mercenaries naturally had a hard time accepting the skills and knowledge in the game. Instead, they tried to kill zombies with their own combat techniques. Claire, the heroine, was soon rescued by Leon, who fired at the zombies with a gun, and it was natural for her to notice this weapon. After all, this series of games had always been nice to heroines. Although there were many zombies, and the process was extremely dangerous thrilling, she still managed to flee from the zombies as she screamed. Different from the original version, the system version had more than those set routes. The players could enter all the shops and houses in the small town to search for supplies. If they could dodge the zombies that were everywhere, they might find weapons and monsters that the original version didn't have. Although the ammunition was limited, they could use sabers, daggers, and other weapons that they picked up from the ground. After escaping from the siege of the zombies, these people explored the small town with pistols in their hands. Although the atmosphere was tense and suppressing, the players felt a pleasure after escaping from death. The thrilling sensation rushed out of their minds after experiencing the life and death situation. "Oh! This is so cool! Excellent!" Despite the dangers around them, they had the urge and the impulse to keep exploring, trying to find out what had happened to this world, why the people had turned into monsters, and if there were more of such magical firearms. "We can play it like this." Mercenary Crete, who had swore that no one could last more 1 minute, was frustrated, and his face turned dark. He turned his head and saw the female mage getting into the zone and enjoying herself. She was busy shooting zombies with her small pistol. "Let's try it too. I remember that I have such a magical firearm too." If they broke out from the siege, they could use their physical strength as warriors to fight the lone zombies. Their combat strengths weren't low, and they could use melee weapons. At this moment, the health condition of Claire, who was under the control of the female mage, deteriorated. She found that somehow a claw scratch appeared on her arm. This wound had blackened, and something was wriggling in the wound. It was a terrifying scene. No. The monster's claws contain poison. Gradually, everything before her turned bloody red, and she somehow felt a strange urge to eat. Soon, the female mage was forced to exit from the virtual reality mode. Meanwhile, Claire had turned into a pale-faced zombie, lunging toward the screen viciously. Ah! Her hands shivered, and she was so frightened that she almost wetted her pants. A moment ago, this female mage was still Claire. She seemed to see herself in the other world turning into a ghost-like creature. That's how these creatures came into being. If I get scratched by them, I'll turn into this type of creatures. Seeing zombie Claire loitering aimlessly on the street, the mercenaries including Crete felt chills run down their spines. In the original game, the players could be healed by eating the green herbs, but now, in the new version, any medicine could only heal wounds. If the players contracted the virus, they must find blood serum before they got turned into zombies. Otherwise, one scratch would turn them into zombies. Obviously, this new version was more difficult to play. Experiencing this situation in person, the mages and mercenaries on this new continent began to realize these creatures' terrifying features bit by bit. One light scratch could turn people into monsters just like them. This realization shocked the players like the continuous waves of the ocean. The players' hearts were in their throats whenever they fought with these monsters. Even if they remained intact through the battle, they were still worried that their companions might have been scratched by a zombie, and they would be bitten by their zombified companions while they were not looking. The players didn't even know when a zombie would appear since they were everywhere in the city. If this were real life, some faint-hearted people would collapse under this pressure. However, since it was a game, this dark and creepy world stimulated the people's desire to explore. Without thinking, the female mage started the game again and re-entered this strange world. Rolling up his sleeves, the mercenary Crete quickly entered the game again. In the virtual reality mode, Resident Evil 2 was much more difficult than Resident Evil 1. Therefore, the main characters who were only ordinary people faced even greater pressure compared to the previous game. For example, Leon came to the police station to report to duty, so he quickly entered the building to investigate. This was the same beginning for all male players. However, when Crete controlled Leon to explore the police station with great care, he suddenly heard a yell of alarm. He saw a bald man wearing a green military coat standing before him like a huge iron tower, a tyrant. On the other side, CIA and the female mage who were playing as Claire shrieked as well. The ceiling broke open, revealing a disgusting monster whose brains were exposed liquor. Yes. The bosses in the movie and game of Resident Evil 1 showed up soon after the beginning of Resident Evil 2. Everyone knew that the liquors were powerful. They had great hearing and could hear everything, including when one was walking, running, and even breathing. Lickers couldn't walk upright, but they could climb the walls and ceilings with their powerful limbs and claws. With their super powerful jumps and swift movement speed, they could even dodge strafing firearms. In the original version, the lickers were not so powerful. After all, the players were not professional fighters. But now, the lickers in the game were as powerful as those in Resident Evil 1. Tyrants were just as powerful if not more. The players were astonished that they encountered these extremely horrifying monsters soon after the game began. These powerful tyrants and lickers were hard to handle even if the mercenaries and mages had their cultivation strengths with them. The mass-produced tyrants were much more powerful than the first-generation tyrants, and they wouldn't die even when they were plunged into melted iron. Unless grandmasters moved, spiritual spells could only tickle them. They were like human-shaped weapons. But now, the players had to face such monsters as ordinary people. This tyrant obviously saw the main character controlled by the blonde mercenary Crete. Ugh! What's this creature? It didn't look like a zombie, but its iron tower-like body, metallic skin, and cold inhuman eyes emanated a great suppressive aura onto the people when it looked at them. Obviously, the new players in the new shop didn't recognize the tyrant. This big bald guy looks strong, but I have a gun with me. At the same time, the female mage, Lilith, had a similar thought facing the liquor. Although the monster before me looks horrifying, I'm not afraid since I have a magical firearm that is more advanced than those firearms created by dwarfs. At this moment, Leon already fired at the monster under Crete's control. Bang! The guns fired. Crete's eyes opened wide as the bullet which could shatter a zombie's head bounced off from the tyrant's forehead. Then, the tyrant that had a iron tower-like body strode over while almost ignoring the bullets before punching down. The tyrant's huge body created a gust. Its huge body didn't look nimble, but its speed surpassed the limit for humans. More horrifying was that it had strong combat techniques. Boom! A big hole appeared on the ground as Leon's head was shattered like a watermelon. Being forced to exit the virtual reality mode, Crete gaped at the scene on the screen. He turned his head and saw Claire under the female mage Lilith's control being pierced by a long tongue before she could react. A thought struck these at the same time: can anyone defeat such monsters? Meanwhile, the young fighters had also exited the virtual reality mode. They stared at the screens in shock. What are these monsters? Isn't this mystical realm a basic one? Crete yelled. After all, only the basic mystical realms suppressed the participants' strengths. But this one? The basic mystical realms built by mages with magical methods were usually used by beginners and thus wouldn't have monsters too powerful for their abilities. After all, even when masters entered such realms, they would try to show the beginners the combat techniques instead of escaping techniques. But such powerful monsters were impossible for people other than true masters and godly spellcasters to defeat. You even suppressed our strength and turned us into ordinary people. What is the meaning of this? What is the use of this game, mystical realm? We can't even escape properly. Are we just coming here to die? This is the mystical realm with the worst design that I've ever seen. After many failed attempts, Crete said with a snort. As Chris's sister, Claire had strong combat techniques. Leon, who had just graduated from the police academy, was a genius. Combat techniques were not only fighting skills, there were also techniques in exerting force and how to better control oneself. Not able to pass this stage, the young people glanced around and saw that the shop owner was also playing the game. After watching for a while, they pointed at Fang Qi's screen and said, "Why don't you try to dodge?" On Fang Qi's screen, he was also facing the tyrant. One wall in the corridor had been shattered by the tyrant with one punch. At the moment when the tyrant charged forward with a punch, Fang Qi took a couple of swift steps and kicked the wall in the corridor with perfect timing. Then, he stomped the wall, and the repulsion force sent him behind the tyrant. Then, he stood up and left, getting out of tyrant's attack range without a fuss. For ordinary people, after they died several times in the game that was too difficult for them, they would either change the game setting illegally, or clear the stage with other cheats, or just give it up. But for masters and lovers of games, they had different thoughts about the games. With greater difficulty and challenges, these players would get greater enjoyment from the game even though the journey was full of hardships. It was the same case with the true masters who walked step after step toward their goal with determination. They loved challenges and were not afraid of hardships, setbacks, and failures. Why can't you handle a more powerful opponent? What did you do when you encountered such a situation in real life? Fang Qi asked. But this is a mystical realm. Crete refuted loudly. Perhaps. But for me, it's just a game, Fang Qi said mildly while controlling Leon to dodge the tyrant's pursuit. Dodging its harsh attacks and finding its weaknesses before defeating it with any method you can is the wisdom of playing games. It was the fun of games to defeat seemingly invincible enemies with one's own wisdom. The others froze, looking as if they understood something. Meanwhile, the players in the old shops encountered the same problem. Nalan Hongyu looked at his screen in frustration after several failed attempts, and he almost puked blood. After thinking for a few moments, he controlled Leon to move swiftly. As an ordinary person, it was extremely difficult to dodge such an attack. Therefore, it was extremely critical that he must control his strength with precision. Dodge! Dodge! At the moment when the tyrant's fist smashed down, Nalan Hongyu suddenly moved his feet and shifted for a few inches to the side in a flash. Then, with small and swift steps, he passed the tyrant with perfect timing. Past it! Excitement and joy filled his heart in the next moment. Ha ha ha! Old brother! Awesome! Zhongwu looked at the screenshot that Nalan Hongyu posted in the group and replied, I think I was inspired by you. This was an understanding of an ultimate technique. But now, tyrants and liquors had become the nightmare of these outlanders. Under suffocating suppression, they had to be on guard every second, and their nerves were under a lot of tension. However, after they escaped from their powerful enemy with a narrow margin, the sense of achievement was so great that they couldn't find words to describe it. When one was trapped under life and death pressure, a huge amount of potential would erupt from one's body. Wow! This Oriental lady is so beautiful. Obviously, Crete had encountered Ada at this moment. How come such a beautiful lady appeared in this place? Are you here for me? You smell so good. He flirted with her casually. Ah! His neck was instantly broken after he got close to her. Looking at the words game over, he remembered the warning written on the small blackboard. Play the games in a civil way or bear the consequences. It was afternoon when people walked out of the shop. The clean and neat streets were lined with tall buttonwood trees. Although Fang Qi preferred the misty scenery of Jiangnan in Zhuhua City and the elegant antique building styles in Yuanyang City, this city had its own charms. Built beside a river and mountains, the city looked magnificent. There were fancy castles at the top of the mountains. Lower down were the business zones and residential areas for rich people. In the middle was a big street winding its way up to the mountain top. Horses and carriages could be frequently seen on the street. Occasionally, teams of city guards walked past people. In the distance was a huge mountain. The lower ranges were covered by green plants. Fewer plants could be seen higher up, and the top was covered by white snow. This city was a refreshing sight for Fang Qi. It was so thrilling. The three young people were still savoring their experiences in the game. They were the two main characters in the game instead of themselves. If they got familiar with the combat techniques of the characters, they might be able to pass some of the levels. After all, they were only playing at the lowest difficulty. Huo! Huo! The blonde young man named Ron mimicked the combat techniques in the game. It's so cool. It seems like these moves are easier to learn than the level 1 battle techniques. These techniques can help me kill one zombie with ease. The girl added in excitement. Da da da. Those magical firearms are awesome. Joseph mimicked the moves. Most importantly, they felt like it was easier to memorize the moves that they learned in this strange mystical realm. They were on their way to their academy. Wow! Look over there. Elves. They're elves from the Silver Moon Forest. Why are they here? Although elves would come to the Morning Light Empire occasionally, most people never saw them paying a visit that was as formal as this. There were few elves in human nations. The elves worshipped their own gods and had their own nations and cities. They seldom had dealings with human nations, but the Morning Light Empire was one of the rare exceptions. There were a little more than 10 elves. The elf in the middle wore a pure white cloak while the others wore the same style of light armor and carried exquisite silver long swords. These long swords were different from the big swords that human warriors in this nation used, they were even slimmer than the long sword of the Oriental shop owner. They had thought that the shop owner's sword was the thinnest sword there was. These elves' bodies were slender, and their ears were a bit sharper and narrower than those of humans but not that extreme. The differences weren't so obvious. If these elves covered their ears with their hair, it would be hard to tell them apart from humans. Maybe the only difference lay in the facial features. The elves' facial features were much more defined and exquisite compared to most humans, they seemed to be favored ones of nature. The young people watched as the elves elegantly rode down the big avenue in the center of the city on some elephant deer. Look who came to greet them, they heard a low chirp and saw griffins with golden feathers flying down the peak of the mountain in a neat wing-shaped formation. The Golden Griffin Knight Legion. It must feel great to fly in the sky riding on a griffin. I hope that one day I can join this Knight Legion. The young people looked up with envy. The Golden Griffin Knight Legion was one of the most famous Knight Legions in the Morning Light Empire. Joining such a Knight Legion was every young person's brightest dream. Stop watching. Let's hurry back to the academy. CIA reminded them. We're finished. If we're late, we'll be in big trouble. Joseph's expression changed. In this nation which put great value in fundamental combat techniques, how were their academies? They placed great importance in real combat since all battle skills must be used in battles. The beginners, including both fighters and mages, were treated the same under this rule. On the meadow near the academy, many fighters and mages, who weren't even level 1 or just reached level 1 or level 2, were practicing each day with big wooden swords, magic staffs, or other weapons. They practiced either in groups or one-on-one. But today, it seemed a little different. The students stood together in a neat group. It seemed like there was more than one class, several classes were gathered here. Before them was a middle-aged swordsman with an unshaved face. Beside him was a valiant-looking woman in armor. A badge in the shape of a golden griffin was pinned on her chest plate, and her blonde hair was tightly pulled up in a bun on the back of her head. When the several young people hurried over, many of the students snickered. The woman frowned slightly. They are late. People dare to be late even on such an occasion. They probably don't know about today's special occasion. A luxuriously clothed young man said in a low voice. His thin and long face looked proud, and he seemed to be quite popular among the students. The moment he said that, some others chimed in. They are just bumpkins from the countryside anyways, a silver-haired handsome young man said. At this moment, the instructor coughed slightly and said, now that everyone is here, we'll begin today's combat practice. As usual, you can practice in groups or one-to-one. The instructor is not going to punish us for being late. Joseph and his companions were baffled since this instructor was usually very strict. However, they had other things to worry about. It seemed like other students had paired off already, which left the three of them alone. Hello, guys. At this moment, the luxuriously dressed young man with an arrogant expression walked over to them and said, if you have no one to practice with, do you want to practice with us? Joseph and his companions were startled since they had heard that these people came from unusual backgrounds even though they were not from the same class. Tolf, the luxuriously dressed young man, obviously had good talent, and it was said that his father was an aristocrat. They immediately found an open space. Thank you, Joseph said in a hurry. They had thought that no one would like to practice with people like them. Thank you. The silver-haired young man snickered and looked at them as if they were morons, and he said, idiots. The three young people froze slightly. What do you mean? It's natural that people like you don't know about this. The luxuriously dressed young man walked up and patted Joseph on the shoulder while saying in a low voice, we'll make good use of you foils to show off our strength. Foils. The three young people stared at them in bafflement. She is a knight from the Golden Griffin Knight Legion, and she is here to choose talented fighters to train as candidate knights in the Legion. Now, do you know why we chose you guys? He snickered and said, you guys are perfect foils for us to show off our abilities to her. The expressions of Joseph and his two companions changed slightly. What? We are late for such an occasion. Looking at the people before them, their faces turned ashen. Today, they would probably become foils to send others to their peak and help them reach their dreams. You're a few truly pathetic rats. In the land lit with bright light, there was no place for darkness. However, this world still had existences hiding in the depths of darkness. Assassins. The assassin group named Underground Council trained and kept the most notorious assassins on the continent. It was born after the destruction of the Sunrise Empire, which was heard to be a nation full of sunshine. But now, it was reduced to gloomy and damp ruins. Like the rats scurrying across the broken streets that were filled with potholes, the assassins who hid underground did the darkest business for money, including assassinating officials of other nations and knights of legions. Besides, they did all kinds of dirty jobs that ranged from fraud to stealing. Most people looked at them with disdain. It was said that the high-level officials in this group had been royal members of this empire. Of course, other nations also had fighters who worked as assassins, but they were not as despised as those in this assassin group. By calling the three young people pathetic rats, Tolf put them into the same category as the lowly and despicable assassins, on top of the already degrading superficial meaning. The moment he said that, more snickers sounded. It was infuriating to be compared with despicable rats. The woman from the Golden Griffin Knight Legion who was watching the combat frowned, since this word reminded her of something that had happened lately. Seeing the reddened faces of the young people who had been humiliated in public, she shook her head and thought, these young people are weaker to begin with, and their mindsets are disturbed by their opponent's words. I don't need to watch this battle anymore. Will you wastrels come together or one by one? The luxuriously dressed young man named Tolf said with a disdainful snicker. The three young people exchanged a look, and they saw the frustration in each other's eyes. Their opponents came from big aristocratic families with powerful backgrounds. It was obvious that they were no match for them. Tolf and his companions chose the weakest opponents. The instructor frowned slightly and shouted with some displeasure, "Begin! What are you waiting for? What did I teach you? Don't lose your courage for battle even when you are faced with powerful opponents. Don't lose your courage for battle even when you are faced with powerful opponents. Dodging its harsh attacks and finding its weaknesses before defeating it with any method you can is the wisdom of playing games." These two sentences seemed to overlap each other while the three young people remembered their life and death experiences with tyrants and lickers, and the omnipresent zombies. Ron slightly tightened his fists and said, "Let me do it." Tolf's face darkened, surprised that these wastrels dared to fight with them. "You are asking for it." With a sulky expression, Tolf slashed out with his huge wooden sword. Obviously, his combat techniques were good, he moved very fast, and his strength was explosive. Soon, he already arrived before Ron. The woman nodded slightly, since the speed and the explosive force that Tolf exhibited were quite good among the people of his level and age. As for the blonde young man, he clearly had less talent and strength compared to his opponent. Although he was brave, it wasn't enough for him to deal with his opponent. While she was thinking that, the blonde young man sidestepped with lightning speed, and the attack missed him. He dodged it. The blonde young man moved 3 times and dodged 3 sword strikes. Then, he placed his hand on his opponent's wrist, anti-joint seizing technique. The audience watched the unexpected scene with astonished expressions. They could see that the blonde young man's battle style was totally different from that of Tolf. He didn't use any combat technique, and his moves were not destructive at all. According to the common battle style, the blonde young man should turn back with a sword slash after dodging to send his opponent flying. However, the blonde young man simply pulled and twisted his opponent's arm with little effort. With his arm twisted up behind him, Tolf howled in pain and didn't dare to fight back anymore. What combat technique is this? Impossible! Tolf's mind turned blank. He couldn't understand how his opponent had subdued him, but he was certain of one thing. "I can't disgrace myself on this occasion." He quickly signaled the silver-haired young man with his eyes. Combat technique: wind strike. Ignoring the rules that they had agreed on, the silver-haired young man directly attacked with his sword. With the roars of gales, white air currents engulfed the blade of the big wooden sword. It was the condensation of gusts. This was a combat technique. Each combat technique, even the low-level ones, was powerful enough to afflict great damage. Quickly dodge! Dodge! The silver-haired young man had a cold grin on his face. The advantage of the combat techniques was that they could only be blocked with other combat techniques. They were ultimate moves that could be used in offensive and defensive situations. How can he dodge it? The instructor's face darkened. Even though it was a wooden sword, it would break several ribs in the blonde young man's body. If he wasn't lucky, he probably would stay in bed for the rest of his life. While the instructor hesitated and was about to walk up to intervene, the woman beside him suddenly stopped him. Then, he saw that the young man had moved to the side right before the sword struck him. This young man dodged it like how he had dodged the tyrant's punch that had horrifying speed and force. Gales whistled past him. He dodged it. 2, together. 3 vs 3. In the next moment, Tolf and his two companions fell to the ground almost at the same time. The audience members gaped at the scene with wide-open mouths. These people? Meanwhile, Mr. Fang had just exited from the game in his shop. Suddenly, he saw that the system had released a new task. New task, nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Task content, the sale of Resident Evil 2 reaches 800, and assassins come to play in the shop. Task reward, the release of the Assassin's Creed series. Mr. Fang wondered, are there such lazy assassins who can live long enough to come to play in my shop? Meanwhile, a woman walked toward the intersection outside the shop. She wore black leather armor, and the hem of her coat swayed in the wind, revealing her long and slender legs and long black boots. It seemed like no one noticed this figure on the busy street. But at a closer look, one would see that everyone seemed to unconsciously stay a few meters away from her. She reached up one hand to block the wind which blew at her flame-like long hair, revealing 5 white and tender fingers. Her exquisite face reminded others of the impeccable features of elves, and the silver earrings made her look vivacious. If not for the chilly light hidden in the depths of her eyes, many people would have thought that she was a female knight with a noble background. Subconsciously, she glanced at the weird name of the shop and thought, well, can this small shop really attract any customers? As an elite of the Golden Griffin Knight Legion, Helen was surprised. She had seen some special occasions when fighters dodged level 2 combat techniques with sidesteps, but it shouldn't happen with teenagers who hadn't even mastered a single combat technique. What's up? She immediately pulled the 3 young people into the nearby small forest. Where did you learn these combat techniques? From Helen's perspective, she felt like there was no way that these combat techniques weren't inherited from their families. The young people's faces turned red while they looked at each other. This was their biggest secret. Should they tell her their secret? If they did, others would also learn these powerful skills. What could they do then? Don't worry, the instructor said, Ms. Helen will not force you to tell your secret. But if you want to join the Golden Griffin Knight Legion, you will have to tell the secret at that time. They hesitated and paused each time they began talking. Just as the instructor and Helen became frustrated with impatience, the young people said as one, we opened the genetic lock. Pucci. The Golden Griffin Knight Helen and the male instructor were astounded. What did you open? What is a genetic lock? I think we must have opened the genetic lock. When Fang Qi told Su Tianji the story, he didn't keep it a secret, so he didn't hide his chat history. The young people had been watching his screen with curiosity and thus saw the story. Remembering his previous fear and the eventual victory, the young man named Ron got excited and said with conviction, it's said that people can open their genetic lock under great pressure. We must have opened our genetic locks, which is why we defeated Tolf and his companions. Hearing his words, Helen and the male instructor felt like their brains had blanked out. After exchanging a look, they asked, what's a genetic lock? Explain it slowly. For example, an old lady can lift a car with one hand to pull her grandson from beneath the car wheels from an accident. It shows the great potential one can tap into when being placed in an extremely dangerous situation, the young people said with great conviction and logic. They explained that everyone had a unique strong suit which was the trigger to open the genetic lock. They gave some other examples. Hearing their theory, Helen and the male instructor exchanged another look. So deep and mysterious. So, Helen asked immediately, do you mean that you opened level 1 genetic lock under the tremendous pressure just now? Her face twitched as she thought, are you serious? I face the Legion commander, my boss, every day, and the pressure is insane. Yet, I didn't open any so-called genetic lock. And you kids opened it in one brawl? She stared at them with intense eyes. Then, who told you about this genetic lock? Mr. Fang. The girl named CIA raised her hand and answered. At this moment, Mr. Fang sneezed in the shop for some reason. Mr. Fang. Helen exchanged a look with the male instructor, and they got more baffled. Who's Mr. Fang? The owner of the Origins Internet Club in the city center. Joseph said immediately. He can fly while standing on a sword. Also, he can turn his shop into an ethereal realm with spiritual spells. Right. 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 Mr. Fang is super powerful. The kids chattered. Mr. Fang must be a master who has opened his level 3 genetic lock. No. He probably has reached the legendary level 4. It was late, and there were few people in the shop. Fatigued with the gameplay, Mr. Fang dozed off at the counter, dreaming that the shop had activated the teleportation array, and he lured Xiaoyu over to play in the new shop. Then, he seemed to dream that he had opened level 4 genetic lock and mastered a new skill, instant synchronization. With this skill, he could get into complete synchronization for a second when attacking or defending, thus greatly reducing the consumption of synchronization time. Bang! A hand slammed on the counter, making the stone top shake a little. It instantly woke up Mr. Fang. Who is it? Mr. Fang looked up and saw a gorgeous girl who was wearing silver armor. She had taken off her helmet, revealing her golden hair that was coiled up in a bun behind her head. She demanded aggressively, "Open my genetic lock! Open your genetic lock!" Rubbing his eyes groggily, Mr. Fang was still savoring his dream and getting a feeling for instant synchronization. 2 magic crystals per hour, and 10 magic crystals for activation. Helen's face twitched. So expensive. He even tried to trick kids with such exorbitant prices. I'll give this unconscientious shop owner a good lesson. Achoo! Rows of data flashed in Mr. Fang's groggily eyes. The synchronization time got consumed at great speed. F***CK. Realizing that he hadn't mastered the so-called instant synchronization, Mr. Fang woke up completely while he turned off complete synchronization. He looked at the empty counter and scratched his head. I seem to have seen a customer. Then, he saw a figure clinging to the door. While waving the crystals in her hand, she said unclearly, "Woo! Open my genetic lock." While taking the money from her hand, Mr. Fang pulled her off the door and asked, "Why did you glue yourself onto the door? Go and get online. Damn it! You just wait and see." Mr. Fang didn't know if the genetic lock could be opened or not, but he knew that he hadn't figured it out yet. However, regarding the question if people could unleash their potential during danger, there were many examples showing that people could indeed unleash great potential during dangerous situations and under great pressure. While Helen began playing Resident Evil 2, Mr. Fang suddenly remembered his dream. Instant synchronization perhaps was going to be something that only he could use. If he mastered it, he might be able to possess the defense ability of Dante's Royal Guard style when he was defending and the awakening skills of the Soul Bender and Grand Master when he was on the offense. He could save the precious synchronization time for the moments he wanted. Could a person's control of techniques and strength reach a granular level with ultimate precision? The answer was positive. If they kept working on their precision, they could achieve a realm that they wouldn't have imagined. The old players were talking in a group chat named Super Railgun. Su Tianji said, "I feel like I have opened my level 1 genetic lock. After playing Resident Evil 2, my reaction speed and control have improved greatly. Tang Yu said, I think I'm going to open my level 1 lock after clearing this stage. Zhang Xiaoyu chimed in, I think I have also opened my level 1 genetic lock. A big white deer added, ha ha ha. I think I'm going to open my genetic lock very soon. They all thought that they had opened or were going to open the genetic lock, and they even defined standards for different levels of genetic lock. Nalan Hongyu said, I think I've reached level 3. Su Tianji replied, Pu. Zhang Xiaoyu added, while reading the messages, Mr. Fang had the urge to crawl over through the cable and beat these people. Meanwhile, Helen had died in the game more than a dozen times, getting killed by either lickers or regular zombies in many ways. She gaped at the screen while her character dodged the lickers' attacks, which were impossible to dodge for humans since it was beyond the reaction speed of humans. While controlling the strength in the body with great proficiency, she started to wonder. Did I somehow open the genetic lock? How come I'm so powerful? Excited, she was eager to continue. When she was about to study the genetic lock some more, she heard a noise. Bang! The noise of a hand slamming the desk startled Helen so much that she almost fell from her computer chair. Then, an ordinary face leaned over with a harmless smile. The shop is closing. Okay. Okay, she ran out. Revenge. It was blatant revenge. Ah! A figure waved her arms crazily only when she got outside the shop. Regardless if the players could open the genetic lock or not, they had obtained tremendous improvement in their skills. In the later part of the game, the players could play as Chris and Ada and would thus encounter monsters much more difficult to deal with. This game would leave them with many nightmares and countless excellent plays and operations. Perhaps these cultivators and warriors would still remember some of the highlights in the game many years later. Meanwhile, on the other side of this world for the Flamebird family and the Thornflower family, they were presented with a good opportunity to rise above the other families. It was midnight, but the lights were bright in the conference room. Sitting at the head of the conference table, the fat man with a big belly had more than 10 badges pinned on his pure white army suit. As the speaker of the Flamebird family, his appearance didn't show his high standing. The sparse hair on his head made him look a little ridiculous, but his squinted eyes and the glints occasionally flashing in them showed that he was a cunning man. Sitting beside him was a middle-aged man wearing a formal black suit. His face was chiseled, and he looked like an elegant gentleman. His expression was always solemn and serious. A detailed map was spread out on the desk. Each detail in each area of the continent of immortal relics could be clearly seen on this map. It was so detailed that it even included the information of the influential figures in each area and each nation. Any new intelligence? The fat man asked. This is the most that we can get for now, Lord Alex. The white-haired old man sitting beside him answered, they have destroyed the portal. If we force our way in, they will discover us and intercept us. Alex, the fat, middle-aged man, frowned and said, the fact that these natives could capture the Vanguard General and the others shows that those people are becoming more incompetent. On the other hand, it means that these natives have their own means, and we must be cautious with them. It's said that they have treasures left by the ancient immortals. The middle-aged man with the chiseled face was the Thornflower family master. His brown curly hair and thin facial features made him look quite competent. He drew a circle around the area of Heavenly Abyss Sea on the map with his finger and said, we are on the offense, and they are on the defense. These damn natives will set a great trap here since this is the most vulnerable spot and thus their key defense spot. Damn it! I think we should give up on this place. Then, we'll be at the disadvantage, Lord Rain. But we have no choice. The elites of our Thornflower aren't a part of the suicide squad, they shouldn't be sent here to die, Rain said, we need nothing but a glorious victory. I can't imagine how they will look at us if other outcomes take place. Then, what's your plan, my lord? We will enter through this and this area. Rain pointed at the borders of the Ultimate West Realm and the Deserted Sea Realm. According to the intelligence that we gained, these two places are most vulnerable with the weakest strengths. We will catch them off guard by attacking these places. With minimal losses, we can establish a base in this damn barbaric world and then send more troops into this area to take," he pointed at the area around the Heavenly Abyss Sea. "We'll take this place in one battle. When we descend onto this land, everything will be settled." Chapter 587 Super Sud TNG Canon. It's said that those damn natives used despicable methods and captured the vanguard General Karl, that genius named the Spear of Sunlight of the Lazon family, and Shadow Spirit Ms. Jessica. Oh! I can't imagine the torture and pain that our beautiful and smart Ms. Jessica must be enduring in that place. At this moment, Jessica was biting into a rind of melon while sitting on a couch in the Yuanyang City shop. Achoo! She was baffled. "Who's talking about me?" Achoo! Karl had a cup of wine, oh no, a cup of iced red tea in his hand. He sneezed as well as he said, "Ah! I spilled it again. My pants. I did it again." Kevin said, "How come I'm fine?" He continued to eat the melon that he took from Jessica while drinking iced red tea. While the others were busy playing games, they could do nothing but eat melons on the couch. They were suffering from the torture of not being able to get online and play games. Oh! They also captured the Shield of Light, whose name is Kevin. He's a master who reached level 9. In the meeting room of Kanglan City, a knight wearing a set of armor with golden patterns said, "I hope that the armies of the Flamebird family and Thornflower family can rescue them." Achoo! The moment that Kevin picked up a rind of melon, he sneezed as well, smashing his face into the fruit. He looked up and was at a loss for words. Of course. The Flamebird family is more ancient than the Lazon family where Karl comes from. A middle-aged knight said with a smile. They are already creating momentum for this rescue mission. Oh! I'm so excited. Spiritual spell visual projection. I think we can watch this war when it begins. I'll ask the Legion commander for permission, so we can go and watch it together. A cheerful atmosphere permeated the entire Night Legion. Meanwhile, on the peak of the tallest winding mountain in the distance, bright lights were still on in the grand hall of the palace, which shot up into the sky like a sharp sword. "Princess, Your Highness!" A white-robed old man bowed slightly and presented an invitation. "The Honorable Saint Heinz has sent troops to destroy those insolent barbaric natives. Interestingly, the Star of Flames of the Flamebird family and the Land of Thorns of the Thornflower family will appear in this war as well." Oh! The beautiful eyes of that female looked cold and indifferent. "Also, the Inquisitor of the Darkwing Night Legion will deal with the person who caused the fall of the Vanguard General and Shadow Spirit. Saint Heinz plans to open the spiritual spell visual projection and is inviting Your Highness to watch it." "Oh," the woman said mildly. "I might watch it to add some fun in my stable and boring days." "Bassa!" The white-robed old man quickly bowed. "Do you think that no one in the world can defeat me?" The white-robed old man said solemnly, "Of course. If someone says that the glory of Princess Your Highness can be destroyed, it will sound as ridiculous as anyone saying that these barbaric natives can defeat the legions sent by Mr. Saint Heinz." Helen was disdainful of her lazy colleagues who weren't focusing on the main task at hand. After crazily playing the game for a while in the internet cafe, she had a feeling that she was going to open her genetic lock soon. It must be. Otherwise, how come my strength and techniques have improved so much? After all, I had only played it for a very short time. In the game named Resident Evil 2, she had no strength in her, but she could dodge the tyrant's attacks and pursuit and even avoid Licker's superfast attacks with great intuition toward danger. If Mr. Fang knew about her thoughts, he would think, WTF? I have been strengthened by the T-virus for so long, and I didn't even unlock the level 1 genetic lock, if there even is such a thing. However, you guys are saying that you are opening level 1, level 2, and level 3 genetic locks. Damn! Anyway, the cultivators of the deserted sea realm, spiritual state, and ultimate west realm had obtained great improvements in their abilities. In the game, Nalan Hongyu was controlling Leon, who had no firearm in his hands. Before him stood a huge monster wearing a researcher's coat that had been torn by the bulging muscles. This monster had one huge and distorted arm and a huge eye on his shoulder. It was William. Nalan Hongyu had only a dagger in his hand. William Birkin was the creator of the G virus. He had super talents and a fanatic passion for the research of viruses. In the end, he had injected G virus into his own body and turned into a monster. G virus William was a monster more horrifying than tyrants. Only cultivators on and above the true lake realm had the ability to kill it. If one got too close to it, they could be instantly killed by its horrifying speed and force. Now in the game, the players had bodies of ordinary people and learned combat skills. At most, they had the top strength that could be achieved by a mortal. It meant that it was a battle between an ordinary person and a monster with the strength of the true lake realm. According to the plot, this horrifying monster would be killed by a ton of high-level weapons. But now, the players had only a dagger. This was the ultimate training. With the reflexes of an ordinary person, he would die instantly if he couldn't control the strength in his body with great precision. Nalan Hongyu controlled Leon to stand calmly before the monster. At this moment, G-Virus William seemed to have moved slightly. Then, he shot forward like a cannonball with a roar. At the same time, Nalan Hongyu tightened his grip on the dagger. It may seem like he had no strength in his body, but in this state, he could feel each tiny strand of muscle in his body, and it felt like this body was in his complete control. Just before the huge fist smashed onto him with whistling sounds of a cannonball, Leon suddenly swayed faster under Nalan Hongyu's control, moving like a slippery fish. F***ck. Z shake. Song Ching Feng and the others who had been watching from behind exclaimed. Then, with lightning speed, the dagger slashed out with strength coming from his feet, waist, arms, and all the other places in the body. Blood gushed out from the eye on the shoulder of G-Virus William, the most vulnerable spot in its body. Superb! Awesome! After several attacks, William finally began to mutate. Its shoulders bulged while its face moved to its chest. It transformed into an even more horrid monster. Its fingers on the right hand turned into huge claws that were almost 1 meter long. Seeing the words "Game Over" on the screen, Nalan Hongyu put down the virtual reality headset with a shake of his head. Awesome! Awesome! He cleared the stage with a dagger. Meanwhile, Su Tianji was hovering in the sky above Liu Yundaist Palace. From the dark clouds covering the sky, a thunderbolt crashed down. The flashing lightning energy condensed into snakes that seemed to be able to tear open the sky, and they gathered in the space before Su Tianji. Then, miraculously, the horrifying heavenly lightning energy in the circle drawn by her finger turned into a coiled lightning snake. Subconsciously, Su Tianji looked down at her chest. Seeing that she hadn't become flat-chested due to the growth of her strength, she heaved a sigh of relief and yelled, "Super Su Tianji Cannon!" However, it was different now. In this world named Resident Evil, she would wonder if there were more powerful magic firearms or even simpler and condensed combat techniques. She even wondered about the ending to this weird story about Leon and Claire. In this strange world completely different from the realm world, what kind of schemes are hidden behind the scenes? What is the ending to this story? Every day, driven by strong curiosity, she went into the world of this story to explore. It was something that she wished to do as early as possible each day. She had kept track of how much strength she had gained each day before. But now, she didn't care about it as much compared to other things. She shook her head. In fact, she didn't have time to think about the game right now. She was working and on duty. The Golden Griffin Legion strolled with a small team of elves on the street not far from the White Pigeon Square. The warm afternoon sunshine fell on the pebble-paved street while the balmy wind brought them the fragrance of soil and flowers, scattering the tense atmosphere before the war. For the elf clan that loved peace, they disliked the word war. When the elves heard the Knights of Golden Griffin talk about the recent news about the war, they frowned in displeasure. Elves excelled in poems, literature, and music, but it didn't mean that they were not good at combat. In fact, they had inherited a set of ancient combat techniques from their ancestors and had the most famous sword masters and archery masters in the world. Mr. Lance. The leader of this team of knights was a middle-aged knight wearing golden armor. He was about 40 years old. Riding alongside him was a male elf with pale golden hair and exquisite and elegant facial features. He wore green tight-fitting leather armor engraved with beautiful and complicated patterns. As if sensing the mood of this male elf, the knight in the lead changed the subject. The knights of our nation value exquisite and advanced combat techniques. In this city, we have masters from all over the world. Mr. Lance, if you have time, you can visit the outstanding magic craftsmanship in our Kanglan city. Really? I heard many people talk about Kanglan city's magic craftsmanship and the Mystic Realm craft studios belonging to the Alchemist Union. Before Lance could speak, an elf girl who was about 16 years old said cheerfully behind them, "But our Silver Moon Forest's magic craftsmanship and combat techniques are also not bad." Of course. The Silver Moon Kingdom has the famous Moonlight Sword Saint, Master Pluto, and Master Sarah. The man in golden armor shook his head and said, "Mr. Lance is a sword master as well. There are so many masters in your kingdom." The girl stuck out her tongue and said, "I heard that the people who have the privilege to join the Golden Griffin Knight Legion are elites among elites. Mr. Elvin, you are a level 7 master already and an influential figure." Their horses ambled along the bustling street. Legion Commander Elvin looked up. Origins Internet Club. When did such a shop appear in our city? It only opened recently, a female knight said. It's said to be a cultivation mystic realm. I heard someone mention it lately. It's a good shop, the female knight added. Ugh! We were just talking about these realms, and we ran into one? The middle-aged Legion commander said, "Mr. Lance, do you want to go in and have a look?" At this time, Mr. Fang had few customers. While he sat in boredom, 2 teams of knights stopped at his door and walked in. These people found the items in the shop quite weird, but they were less confused when they saw that the shop owner was a foreigner. "I think you, Ms. Sala, is an unusual genius. Few people of your age can join Mr. Lance's team," they continued to chat. "Mr. Elvin, your teacher is a famous master in this nation, we don't dare to compare ourselves to him. I remember that Mr. Lance is one of the youngest sword masters in the Silver Moon Kingdom. This should be a basic mystic realm of the lowest difficulty level." While talking about things like masters and sword saints, these people paid, got on computers, and started the game. In less than 10 seconds, game over. They suddenly stopped chatting. The place turned silent. Such lame players dare to say that they are masters and sword saints. Big Sword Crete swaggered past them with his peers and a bottle of Coke in his hand. He learned the slang from the shop owner and used it while glancing at the back of the heads and the tall computer chairs. Helen, who was about to start the game in excitement, heard this comment. "Pu." Elvin stuck out his head from behind the computer chair while his face twitched. Lance stuck out his head from behind the computer chair as well. Damn it! Different from the old shops, the new shop was harmonious without any trouble after Mr. Fang showed off his ability to fly on a sword and sent Helen flying with one sneeze. However, the cultivators and warriors in the old shops in the deserted sea realm and spiritual state had a different feeling now. In the desolate remote place north to the 3 saint factions, the sky suddenly turned dark with thunder, lightning bolts, and gloomy clouds appearing. Meanwhile, in the sky above the small nation of mortals in the Morning Star Sea realm where Fang Qi had visited once, boom! Black lightning bolts as thick as water streams destroyed buildings. In the deserted snowy land in the westernmost area of the spiritual state, gloomy clouds gathered with the same horrifying phenomenon. At this moment, Mr. Fang received a prompt from the system. Beep. With most players in the shops reaching the threshold for combat techniques, you have obtained the achievement, Basic Techniques. Activating the series of achievements tasks, Techniques reaching Deo. Techniques reaching Deo, Basic Techniques, the number of players who have mastered the basic techniques reaches 10,000. Completed, Achievement Reward, Limited Time Offer Movie, The Duel, obtained, TL Note. The Duel is a 2000 Hong Kong wuxia comedy film directed by Andrew Lau and starring Andy Lau, Ekin Cheng, Nick Chung, Christy Yang, Zhao Wei, and Patrick Tam. Techniques reaching Deo, 2 basic techniques, the number of players who have mastered the basic techniques reaches 50,000. Incomplete, Achievement Reward, Limited Time Offer Movie, Tai Chi Master TL Note. Tai Chi Master, also known as Tai Chi Master and Twin Warriors, is a 1993 Hong Kong martial arts film directed by Yuen Wu-ping, and produced by Jet Li, who also starred in the film. When one's technique came to the peak stage, they could take a step forward and get in touch with Deo. This was the realm of techniques reaching Deo. Techniques were not auxiliary to strength. According to legends, there were 3,000 great Deo. Looking at the prompt on the system interface, Mr. Fang was puzzled. There's a time limit on this movie. Apart from the limit time, he also noticed other restrictions. 40 crystals, magic crystals, for activation, only available 3 times, and 1 viewing per person. F***CK. Mr. Fang was astonished. Besides being expensive, it even set a limit on viewing period and time. It must be noted that as the shop owner, Mr. Fang now had high privileges and authorities. For example, he had the right to set the release date of the movie for different shops. Mr. Fang postponed the release date of the movie in the new shop. He had reasons for this decision. The customers in the new shop wouldn't understand the concepts shown in the movie. It wasn't that they were not good at techniques, but they couldn't understand the oriental techniques and the Deo shown in the movie since they were still hacking and slashing with swords and sabers that were as big as doors. Therefore, they still needed time to get used to this. Right now, the players in the new shop could do nothing but play Resident Evil 2 or watch its movie version. Laymen only go for the fun while professionals could spot the essence. Reaching Deo with techniques had nothing to do with the cultivation strength. Only people who understood it could see the dazzling power of that sword technique. The duel? What's this thing? Lately, Su Tianji had come to the shop quite late due to her practice of the new spiritual spell. But today, she saw something new in the shop. Ha ha ha! She was excited. Since she had opened the genetic lock, which was a new concept, she had obtained great improvement in her control abilities and techniques, helping her break through the bottleneck in transforming lightning fire into threads. With her new abilities, she could finally practice that new spiritual spell. Today, she discovered a new thing. Limited time. We can only watch it once. So expensive. In the Yuanyang City shop, Castellan Zhongwu had just arrived. The Duel. A movie. In Mr. Fang's tour group in QQ, Su Tianji at ed everyone. Do you guys want to watch the new movie? Get on board. Husky's grinning face, Zhang Xiaoyu asked, boss released a new movie. A big white deer said, I want to watch it. I'm on board. Nalan Mingxiu typed, at Mr. Fang. Sir, are you coming? Mr. Fang replied, you guys can go ahead and watch it without me. Unamused face Song Ching Fang chimed in, unamused face it won't feel the same without the shop owner. Tang Yu said, come on. Let's go. Lu Ningyun added, sir, get on board now. Don't waste time. Unamused face Mr. Fang said, don't fool around. This shop hasn't released it yet. Awesome. Nalan Hongyu said, great thinking. Song Ching Feng posted a meme showing Mr. Fang clapping his hands fiercely. Mr. Fang almost spewed blood onto his screen. Ever since these people learned how to battle using memes, they created all kinds of new memes. Which one of you even learned how to use Photoshop? This software could be bought in Xon, Song Ching Feng replied. At Zhang Xiaoyu, Mr. Fang's face twitched as he thought, damn it. As your boss, I only took a few bags of potato chips from you. Zhang Xiaoyu said, then, we'll go and watch it without you. Hee hee. Husky's cute face, she tried to change the subject. This. Mr. Fang was feeling powerless. Meanwhile, the three people who could do nothing but watch others play gathered together. Jessica stared at the small blackboard and said, they have a new movie, Kevin suggested, now that the shop owner isn't here, should we? Carl replied, I tried it, when someone went to the bathroom. It's no use. At this moment, Gabriel said, can you guys help me throw the garbage? I'm busy watching the movie. The three people fell silent. Weren't they homies and good buddies? Feeling like crying, they went over to dump the garbage. At this moment, Su Tianji, Nalan Hongyu, and the players in other shops including Zhongwu and Gu Tingyun began to watch the new movie. Watching the movie together in Xon, Nalan Hongyu and others found that the scene before them dimmed, and they couldn't see anything behind them as well. When they could see light again, the scene changed to a long street engulfed in a thin mist. It was a full moon night on the peak of the Forbidden City. The battle was scheduled on the 15th of August on the purple gold mountain of Moling, but Ximen Chuixu insisted and postponed it to 1 month later and changed the venue to this place. In a narrow street, a shop just opened. While steam floated out of the pot of soy milk, the audience saw two men talking about the duel scheduled in 1 month's time. One of them was a man who had 4 eyebrows, Lu Xiaofeng. This man had a mustache, and which counted a pair of eyebrows in others' eyes. TL note, Lu Xiaofeng is the fictional protagonist of the Wuxia novel series Lu Xiaofeng series by Gulong, and this movie was a section of the series. Ximen Chuixu. Nalan Hongyu murmured to himself curiously. Yekukan. Zhongwu was also puzzled. Gradually, they understood that Ximen Chuixu and Yekukan were the most powerful sword masters in this world. But how come I feel like the people in the movie don't have high strength? Zhongwu said in a low voice. I think so too, Su Tianji frowned. Nalan Hongyu also looked disappointed. Let's watch it for a while and see. Soon, they saw the figure that seemed to have descended into the mortal world like a flying immortal. The white-clothed girl walked downstairs with a basket of yellow chrysanthemum, scattering the bright flower petals on the stairs and turning it into a flower carpet. Then, a person slowly walked up, stepping on the flowers. In the next moment, the viewers felt like they were fortunate enough to see that sword strike. They couldn't find words to describe the radiance and glory of that slash or its speed. It felt like it wasn't a sword slash but the fury of the god of thunder. There's such a person and such a sword technique. The audience stared at this streak of sword beam without blinking, afraid to miss any detail. With a bitter smile, Nalan Hongyu realized that he wasn't seeing strength but an ultimate sword technique that was at the peak of all techniques. It reached the ultimate level in terms of force, speed, angle, and timing. This man's opponent didn't even have a chance to block it. Despite the Tang family's world-famous skills with hidden weapons, his opponent didn't have a chance to use it. At this moment, the audience had the feeling that it was the most dazzling thing that they could ever see in the world, and nothing could be compared to it. This movie. F***ck. So powerful. At this moment, most of them understood that what the movie intended to show wasn't strength but a new realm. How about Ximen Chuixu? Nalan Hongyu couldn't wait to watch what realm Ximen Chuixu, Yekukan's opponent, had reached. This movie didn't contain frightening strength, but it showed the swordsman's tireless pursuit for the ultimate sword Dao despite the limit of their physical strength. It was a road of reaching Dao through techniques. The perfect sword technique was the resemblance of sword Dao. Without being overpowered by insane and brute strength, the sword Dao was clear and pure. As the movie went on, the audience followed the characters into the ancient and prosperous nation and the magnificent and luxurious Forbidden City which was the royal city. After passing Taiji Gate, they saw the grand palace covered in golden glazed tiles. Under the moonlight, it looked like a world made of gold. Look! Is the duel about to begin? Standing before the royal city, Dong Qingli was excited as she stood in the crowd who were here to watch the duel. Senior sister, is this the royal city? Mu Qing looked around while grabbing Yu Bai's hand. Beside them, Zhang Xiaoyu also glanced around curiously, standing with a big white deer. The bright moon shone on the boisterous crowds. Here he is! Here he is! Nalan Hongwu, Zhongwu, and other warriors were also standing before the grand palace, and they looked up over the eaves of the building. Is he Ximen Chuixu? In the moonlight, they saw a figure flying over with his white clothes fluttered in the wind. Only after seeing him would people truly understand the feeling of the phrase, a type of people who are close to being gods. Just as he said, my sword is not for show. When you pierce your sword into their throats and see the blood flower bloom out around your sword tip, you'll know that nothing in the world is as beautiful as the radiance of that moment. His sword techniques were for killing. These types of sword techniques couldn't contain any impurities, including emotions and feelings. People crammed the space around the Grand Palace, including the audience from the shops in Yuanyang City, Zhuhua City, and Half City. They all craned their necks to watch the duel. The moon was overhead now. Standing on the ridge of the roof that looked to be made from gold and glass, the two men were all dressed in spotless white clothes. They looked so powerful, Zhang Xiaoyu watched with widened eyes. She glanced around and found that everyone around her was also watching with their eyes wide open. At this moment, standing on the roof of the Grand Palace, Ximen Chuixu raised his sword expressionlessly and said, "This sword is one of the sharpest weapons in the world. The blade is 3 feet 7 inches long, and the total weight is 7.13 pounds. Yekukan said, "Good sword." Then, Yekukan lifted his sword as well and said, "This blade is the best out of all the chili swords from overseas. It will cut through hair if you blow on it. The blade is 3 feet 3 inches long, and it's extremely sharp with a total weight of 6.4 pounds. Both had lifted their swords but didn't unsheath them. Drawing the sword was an integral part of sword techniques. Obviously, they wanted to compete in any area within the range of swordsmanship. So cool! Song Qingfeng wished that it was he who was standing on the roof, wondering how they could appear so dashing in a duel. Should we copy them after we finish watching the movie? Standing beside him, Lin Xiao suggested imitating this duel afterwards. Watching the mysterious incidents one after another, the audience began to understand the truth behind the postponing of the duel. The scheme of assassinating the emperor and trying to rebel helped the audience to better understand the characters who were both intelligent and complicated. Yekukan, the castellan of White Cloud City, seemed to be a lofty god. He was a proud and horrifying person. His sword technique, flying immortal beyond the heavens, was as impeccable and spotless as the white clouds in the blue sky. His mind was as unfathomable as the abyss and the ocean. The audience began to understand the unique magnificence of this world shown in the movie. If they had watched the duel right after Fang Qi shops were opened, they wouldn't have been enthralled and wouldn't find these sword techniques exciting and grand. Before their swords connected, they moved their positions slowly but constantly, but the sword blades changed positions swiftly since the swords moved with their minds before using the techniques. Having a deep understanding of swordsmanship, only Nalan Hongguo could perceive the horrifying power of this realm. Regardless of how someone tried to dodge or duck, they would face an ultimate sword strike which was perfect in every way, including the spirit, essence, speed, force, position, and all other related elements. They showed a nearly perfect control of their swords. It seemed their sword moved with their minds, and people felt like there was no need for time to react. More horrifying was that no matter how their sword techniques, their positions, and their opponents' positions changed, Nalan Hongguo was sure that the sword techniques they used in the next moment would still be perfect. The audience had never imagined that such a combat method existed in the world. Now, the audience could only see the moving of the blades and the swordsmen, but neither of them used their techniques yet. But Nalan Hongguo understood the duel. He could even see the countless duels in the slightest move of their blades. With their nearly perfect control, when they spotted the tiniest opportunity, they would instantly turn the changes and variations that existed in the void into a solid and perfect sword strike. Without the disguise of great strength and the show of force, others could see the underlying principles better. Finally, the viewers saw the two use their sword techniques. At this moment, the stars and the moon dimmed. All the light in the world gathered on the two swords. They each used only one sword strike. At this moment, exclamations erupted all over the shop. They saw that Yagukin's sword was like a gust beyond the white clouds. However, an invisible thread seemed to be tied to Ximenchuix's sword, and it represented his wife, his families, and his emotions. There was the tiniest gap between them. Nalan Hongyu, Zhongwu, and the cultivators including Gu Tingyu all opened their mouths, trying to yell but couldn't, as if something strangled their throats. The whole place was silent. The moon and stars disappeared in the sunlight radiated from the morning sun from the east. However, the audience saw Yagukin lie in a pool of blood, the man who had looked like an immortal in a white cloud in the blue sky. When all his schemes collapsed, he had decided to die under Ximenchuix's sword, which was the last honor of a swordsman. Perhaps at this moment, two names were branded in the minds of the viewers. The names were as lofty as immortals and gods. This duel was printed into their minds as well. Like poetry, the saying goes, on the night of the full moon, on the peak of Forbidden City, a sword came from the west, flying immortal beyond the heavens. A long while later, they snapped back to reality. Ah! Awesome! After watching the movie, Song Qingfeng almost roared. A sword came from the west, flying immortal beyond the heavens. Nalan Hongyu murmured these two sentences. Despite his great age and experience, his eyes turned red with deep feelings. Su Tianji took out her black snow godly sword and lifted it while saying, "This sword is one of the sharpest weapons in the world. The blade is 3 feet 7 inches long, and the total weight is 7.13 pounds. She felt very cool while saying it. Palace Master Xuedaolf saw this, and his face twitched. Damn it! It's black snow, not the sword in the movie. Then, Nalan Mingxiu took out her snow-drinking saber and said coldly, "This blade is the best out of all the chilly swords from overseas. It will cut through hair if you blow on it. The blade is 3 feet 3 inches long, and it's extremely sharp with a total weight of 6.4 pounds. She felt great about herself. The others had tears on their faces. Damn it! This is a blatant show-off. Regardless if they were showing off or not, people gathered in the open space before the shops. Obviously, this movie inspired the players, and they didn't want to wait and waste this moment. The cultivators and warriors all ran out of the shops. Song Qingfeng said, "Please." Lin Xiao said with a straight face, "Not now." "Why not?" Song Qingfeng was so expressionless that the audience's faces twitched. "Because your mind is not at peace," Lin Xiao said with great dignity. "If your mind is troubled, your sword techniques will be disturbed, which will undoubtedly lead to your death. Trash! Watch my flying immortal beyond the heavens." Su Luo couldn't watch it anymore. While some people acted out the scenes from the movie in a terrible manner, others were serious and savored their inspirations. Nalan Hongyu had indeed obtained many inspirations. He moved his black sword slowly as if he were imitating something. He seemed to have found a special rhythm. Meanwhile, Zhongwu, Liang Haihu, and other warriors were also savoring the perfect sword strike in the movie. As for the cultivators, they were savoring the perfect control of swords, their own strength, essence, and everything that they could put in use. Regardless of how much they could understand, they had obtained tremendous growth. In the distant, primitive snow-covered land to the west of the spiritual state lived a group of strong and proud people. They kept company with huge dragons and living in ice and frost. They had built a nation in the chilly high mountains in the ancient times, and their descendants lived there until today. But today, they faced destruction when the black lightning bolts tore open the sky. The city built on the high snow mountain looked like it was made of ice. Right now, holes were everywhere, and there was only the scene of devastation. In the huge ice snow palace on the peak of the highest mountain stood a man with an imposing figure. At first glance, people would think that he was a giant. He was wearing red armor and was holding a huge dragon-headed saber that was almost as tall as himself. Standing on the huge platform, people could see the distant snow mountains. A dark blue stone palace engulfed in pale blue light patterns hovered in the sky, and strange stone array discs flew around it. Strange spiritual lights flowed around the huge and ancient round array discs while many spiritual patterns containing spiritual power blinked on them. When they blinked, holy light beams shot down from the sky and turned into destructive magic light, shattering the ground and destroying the cities. Your Majesty! A middle-aged general who was covered in blood bowed to him. We can't block them. Please evacuate this place now. The huge man didn't answer. This should be the liveliest moment of the day in this beautiful city built on ice, but it felt like the doomsday today. It seemed like the roars could shake the ground. In a distant mountain, a huge blood-red horned dragon let out a great roar. This is the land that we've lived on for thousands of years. The man in red armor was once the strongest Grand Emperor warrior on the continent. After getting onto his blood dragon, he charged into the sky. Compared with the destructive shadow in the sky, the huge horned dragon looked very tiny. Perhaps today was really their doomsday. The ultimate West Realm wasn't the only place that was under siege. Meanwhile, like an immortal relic, a fiery red palace hovered in the high sky above the small human nation in the Morning Star Sea realm. Situated in the very depth of the continent, Xianzhong Manor and Yuxu Mountain had never imagined that disaster would strike them so harshly. Today, many flames crashed onto the mountains like meteors, destroying all the spiritual essence in the factions and turning their garden of abundant spiritual plants into scorched land. At this moment, the spiritual spell visual projection had begun. With its great force almost covering more than half of the nations on the continent, the Judgment Godly Palace even had churches and followers in the Morning Light Empire. Even some of the royal members of the Morning Light Empire believed in the gods of Judgment Godly Palace. Due to the great development of information technology in this world, all kinds of magic items entered people's everyday life. Even civilians in the city could gather on the central square of Kanglan City to watch the spiritual spell visual projection cast by the priests of Judgment Godly Palace. In the center of the square, the light emitting from the magic crystal soon condensed into a screen. Ms. Sala, I understand that you dislike wars. Am I right? A knight of the Golden Griffin Knight Legion saw the short elf girl who had silver hair and was wearing green leather armor when he got here. Different from you, I'm here to see when the war will end, the elf girl said. Oh, I don't wish for the war to begin since it will cause many people to suffer. Almighty Elf God, please end this war as soon as possible. Ms. Sala, you're a kind person. If they hand over Carl, Jessica, and Kevin, I think the war will end very soon, the knight said with a snort. Meanwhile, Jessica was eating melon on a couch in Yuanyang City shop, and she exclaimed, What? They are here. Xiner. Xiner. Get me a bottle of iced red tea and a bag of potato chips. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to have such delicacies after returning home. Oh, coming. Carl said immediately, get me a bottle of red tea too. Of course, the war wasn't waged just because of the three of them. But clearly, the flames of war continued to spread. In the spiritual spell visual projection, people saw a middle-aged man who was about 40 years old explaining the current situation in the war. This man had dark skin and short brown hair that was neatly combed to two sides, and he wore a black military uniform. As an ambassador from the Radiant Light Godly Nation, Luther was proficient with this work. He talked with ease while watching the war. Now, we are seeing the battlefield in that continent. As you can see, our three forces had gained footholds on this continent. These weak natives couldn't fight back at all. Let's first look at the battlefield in the west of the continent. We've captured the Blood Dragon Grand Emperor Warrior of the Ultimate West Realm. Yes, you heard it right. Oh! It's unbelievable. Is he really the ruler of this world? He's so weak. Of course, our fighters are the strongest. Sitting beside her was the famous Saint Heinz. Besides these two powerful figures, other powerful figures from the Radiant Light Godly Nation and other godly nations sat in the palace. The image projection of the old man who had visited the Guardian of Wind also sat among them. Grand Emperor Warrior. One of these prestigious existences frowned. Like ants, they don't know how big the world is and how weak they are. They also have no idea that there are always stronger people out there, which is why they gave themselves such lofty titles. The old man laughed heartily. It's you, Mr. Saint Hematon, the world mage, another existence said. Before them, the scene turned to another place under the control of the spiritual spell visual projection. These are the legendary three saint factions on this continent. Behind these grand palaces, we can see Yuexu Mountain, one of the three saint factions. Oh! I can't believe it. I thought it would be a hard battle. How dare such a weak faction call themselves saints? It seems that I must agree with you, Mr. Saint Hematon, a figure engulfed in golden light said. It's a shame that such an existence dares to use the title of saint. The figure shook his head in disdain. Oh! What are we looking at? This human nation is so weak. Their king. Oh, my God! The strongest master of this nation is equivalent to a level 5 fighter here. Only level 5. It's unbelievable. I'm sorry for my outburst. What I wanted to say is that only uncivilized land can create such a nation. Then the scene turned to the deserted sea realm. Oh! It's unbelievable. At this moment, Joseph, CIA, and other young people were also watching the spiritual spell visual projection while sitting on a bench on the edge of the square. With disbelief in their eyes, they listened to Ambassador Luther's explanations and saw how deluded the people in that land were about their own abilities and importance. How can they think this way? Oh! It's hard to imagine how they can live in such a world. It's horrifying. I hope they will be saved so that we can see the redemption of this world. Meanwhile, in the Yuanyang City shop a young man with red-brown hair was busy playing Dungeon Fighter online. He was Gabriel. Suddenly, he slammed his hand on the desk and shouted, F***CK. Our home is being attacked. He actually spoke fluent spiritual state language. Then, more warriors of the Ultimate West Realm jumped up from their chairs. Brothers! Grab your weapons and go! Gabriel yelled. Bring more colorless crystals! More colorless crystals! F***CK. Where's the disassembler? Disassemble more of them! I'll get some more spiritual artifacts and toss them in. Meanwhile, Zhongwu was practicing sword techniques outside the shop. Dumbfounded, he watched the uproar among the warriors of Ultimate West Realm and wondered, what's going on? Bad news. Elder Yu ran into the internet cafe in alarm. Everyone! The catastrophe is about to strike the spiritual state now. What catastrophe? Last time they claimed that it would come in 3 months, but nothing has happened after such a long time had passed. Zhongwu shouted back, what catastrophe are you talking about? Academy Master Gu has foreseen a greater catastrophe coming our way. Those existences. They are coming for real. Elder Yu said in a loud voice. What? How come nothing came from the heavenly abyss sea? They attacked from the Ultimate West Realm. Right now, there were almost 10,000 players in the shop from all over the region. There were more who hadn't come into the shop yet. Groups of warriors and cultivators exited from the games and stood up while slamming the desk. Meanwhile, in the Zhuhua City shop the street outside the shop was crammed with cultivators and warriors. There were more in the shop. The purple-robed deist of Xianzhong Manor and the old man of Yuexu Mountain stumbled out the shop with communication jades in their hands, almost spewing blood on the door. No! Those people are attacking from the direction of our factions. What? Jiwu was practicing sword techniques outside the shop. He was the emperor, but maintaining his warrior strength was quite important, which was why he spent hours on cultivation and practice each day. This time, we're in it together. We must unite and work in consolidation. The two faction masters felt like crying. Why are the enemies attacking our factions first? And we are here in the internet cafe. They cussed silently in frustration. Don't worry, faction master Wang. Lan Mo thought for a moment, knowing that it wasn't time to uphold personal grudges. And Huey said, where is the Zhuhua army? At this moment, Deputy Commander Gong He was still playing the Legend of Mir 2. In the game, a warrior was chasing after a wizard while holding a huge and heavy saber. You dare to run? Run more! On the screen, a huge white spiritual sword crashed down viciously. Watch my sky-opening strike! Boom! Ha 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 ha! You can't run now, hey? With my 40-meter-long big saber, I can let you run for 39 meters. Then, this man put down the virtual reality headset and shouted, Zhuhua Army! Zhuhua Army! Standing beside Nalan Hung Guyu, Elder Fu cupped his hands. My lord! Okay. Nalan Hung Guyu stroked his snow-white beard and stood as he withdrew his sword. It's time. In the half-city shop sitting at the counter, Zhou Mo slightly closed his eyes and seemed to see a strange scene. He froze. No. Sister Ruan Ning, they are here. What do you mean they are here? Mo Tianxing asked as he sat on the couch. Aha! I calculated with my fingers. A mass of black mist floated down from the second floor. You're all in danger. Ning Bai immediately stood up from her chair and gave it a hard look. Smirking face emoji, you'll be the first to be sacrificed if we're in trouble. She frowned. They are here. Where's my great internet cafe army? Here. The cultivators and warriors in the shop answered. Row after row of cultivators and warriors stood up from their seats. Tang Yuan said, I'm tired of killing abyss demons 100 times a day. It's great for us to fight for real to change it up. Black Demon said, let's go. Come on. Let's nail them. Mr. Fang sent a message in the group chat, some people are making trouble for us, homies. Gu Tingyu added, Internet Cafe Army. Roll out. Internet Cafe Army. Roll out. Internet Cafe Army. Roll out. Messages instantly flooded the screen. In their eyes, this would be a landslide victory. They had made a detailed war plan just to achieve a perfect victory. Have you scouted out the routes? As the commander, Alex directed this battle in person. Despite the weak strength of their enemies, he was well prepared. Yes, we have. The guard presented him a map on which the red lines marked their direction of attack. Even the forces along the route and their strength had been figured out and reported. They could see that from the three saint factions toward Heavenly Abyss Sea, the strength of the forces dropped. These barbaric natives don't know that we can see them as clearly as if they are lights in the night. Meanwhile, outside the north border of Dajin all kinds of huge spiritual ships were parked on the vast desert. By now, these spiritual ships had been improved many times after they exchanged spiritual ship production processes with the Gongsha family and the cultivators of spiritual state. These spiritual ships were much more powerful than the old version. In the Ultimate West Realm it seemed like doomsday had come for these people of the Ultimate West Realm. The homeless people of the Ultimate West Realm were either captured or hiding in the bitter cold snow mountains, waiting for a chance to fight back. At this moment, almost all the prisons in the region were full of captives, and it wasn't enough. Many warriors of the Ultimate West Realm were forced to take off their armor. In tattered dirty clothes and chained, they kneeled on the snow-covered square of Snow Peak City, the biggest city in the Ultimate West Realm. With their cultivation strength sealed by that mysterious force, their bare feet and hands were frozen and turned purple. Even though these warriors had been born and raised in this bitter environment, it was hard for them to withstand this harsh cold without cultivation strength. The huge magical stone palace hovered in the sky, casting a huge shadow and almost engulfing the whole Snow Peak city. For the residents, this was the most terrifying nightmare that they had in the past thousands of years. It must be noted that Tewi, the title that Carl used in the beginning, was a translation for regime after he had learned the spiritual state language with a spiritual spell. On this other land where people used the ancient godly language, this word meant God of radiant light judgment who controlled the rise and fall of the two suns and had the right to judge other gods. All the lofty members of the godly palace were proud of their radiant and esteemed image. Luther was especially attentive to his image. Before he appeared in a public place, he would spend 1 to 2 hours to groom himself. In a shadowy place outside the White Pigeon Square in Kanglan City, 2 figures stood while wearing dark grey cloaks. Obviously, they didn't like to be exposed in sunlight. Ambassador Luther of the Radiant Light Godly Nation is just a dog to the Judgment Godly Palace. Oh! He's just a clown. A complete clown. Look at his disgusting face while he shows off in the spiritual spell image projection. Damn it! I want to throw dog sh*t on his face and tear his dirty mouth into pieces. However, Luther didn't pay any attention to such insults because these people were as low as the mice and bugs living in the slums and sewers. However, if such words reached him, some people would be in big trouble. I remember that someone once asked me if lowly and corruptive existences still are around under the God's light. I thought that there was only one kind of such beings who hide in the filth and darkness, even the God can't save them, he continued after a pause. Oh, I think you know whom I'm referring to. They wear filthy clothes, emit a stinky odor, and inhabit the dirtiest spots, such as in the sewers. Now, I think that the barbaric natives are as low as them. At this moment, the visual shown by the spiritual spell displayed a small nation in the Morning Star Sea realm. Look at this humble and pathetic nation. Even the strongest masters are only at level 5. Ho ho! But I still hope that the God's radiance will shine on this land as soon as possible. Oh! What do we see? At this moment, they had a glimpse of a line of black shadows in the distant horizon. The black shadows moved forward swiftly through the clouds beyond the northern snow mountains to the west of the spiritual state. They, barbaric natives, are coming to us. Even in the grand palace where powerful masters gathered with Saint Heinz, many of them looked surprised. Haha! They dare to attack? I thought that they would defend that sea area. At least by concentrating their forces, they might be able to struggle and fight back for a bit. Land of Thorns is personally guarding this godly palace, and 6 Sky Knights and 3 prophets of the Thorn Flower family are also here. They are all level 9 super masters. These natives dare to come to us. Get the destruction scale magic cannon ready. In the fancy central hall of that grand palace, a man who was wearing a luxurious black robe with golden patterns sat on his seat. Before him stood 9 people in 2 rows, emitting suffocating presences. They were the 6 Sky Knights and 3 prophets of the Thorn Flower family. It's time to give the ignorant natives a taste of our power. Born in the reclusive cultivator community in 7 Saint Mountain, Fairy Qingyun was not good at fighting. However, not all cultivators who weren't great at combat were useless in war. Fairy Qingyun excelled in making elixirs, spiritual treasures, supporting spiritual spells, and even calculation techniques. Although she had been idle lately, she watched The Legend of the White Snake every day. While she watched Bai Sahen calculating and seeing people's previous lives and the future of Little Qing and others, Fairy Qingyun obtained more inspiration, and her calculation technique improved. Now, she only needed to do a calculation with her fingers to know anyone's position and conditions and even the layout of forces in a certain area. Despite her lack of combat abilities, she was stationed on the flagship ship. She felt proud of herself. They are really getting close. Luther sounded disdainful. At this range, we can put the spiritual spell closer to them, so we can get a good look of these pathetic barbarians. On the square and in St. Heinz's Grand Palace, the spiritual spell image projection zoomed in. Soon, they had a clear view of the huge, classy and beautiful spiritual ship in the center of the group. 9 people including Gu Tingyun and the masters and elders of the ancient families were standing on the bow and looking at the distant sky. Their clothes were beautiful and grand, dignified yet not dull, haughty yet not rude. They looked like people from a mysterious and ancient nation with beautiful scenery. Standing at the bow with their white robes fluttered in the wind, these people looked like immortals descending into the mortal world. My goodness! Wow! Are they really barbaric natives? Exclamations rose in the White Pigeon Square. Didn't someone say that they are uncivilized and unruly people wearing filthy clothes like those despicable beings? CIA froze in amazement while covering her little mouth with her hand. Oh! Almighty Elf God! Beside them, Sala, the young elf girl, was also stupefied. I think, at this moment, they realized that these people who Luther described as uncivilized, dirty, and lowly barbaric natives were completely different from their imagination. Mr. Fang was walking past the White Pigeon Square after having lunch, and he saw this scene. Pu Yekukin. Ximen Chuixu. Damn it! The moment he said it, 3 hexagonal stone gates opened in the ancient stone palace, revealing 3 black cannon muzzles. Even without firing, they emitted a horrifying suppression. At this moment, several figures flew out of the Grand Palace. The person in the middle was Wilson, the Land of Thorns. He was the powerful existence who had sat in the center of the Grand Palace in a luxurious black robe with golden patterns. The 6 knights were wearing armor of different colors, and the 3 prophets in black spiritual robes flanked him. They floated in midair as if gravity didn't apply to them. We should give you the most severe godly punishment for your previous sins, Land of Thorns, Wilson said. Our God is merciful and will give you a chance to redeem yourselves. As long as you hand over the hostages and accept our God's glory, I think the God will forgive you. They were surprised that these barbaric natives dared to come to them, and they would grab this opportunity to realize their goal. As mentioned before, they needed a glorious victory, and subduing the barbaric natives without bloodshed was a good way to achieve this goal. Oh! What do I see? Are these barbaric natives crazy? The image turned to another battlefield. At this moment, on the border of Dajan, the Internet Cafe army encountered the Godly Palace Legion, which had conquered the 3 saint factions and was marching towards the Heavenly Abyss Sea. No! These barbaric natives are crazy. I feel like the barbaric natives on the other battlefield are going to come to us as well. Luther suddenly changed his tone and said, do you think it looks like that they are here to surrender? It's hard to imagine. Instead of wearing armor, their warrior are wearing white clothes. Are they going to a wedding or a ball? His teasing words made the audience chuckle. However, it was quiet in St. Heinz's Grand Palace. The lofty existences were not a bit disturbed. They only watched and wondered if these barbaric natives were going to surrender. They were certain about the outcome of this war. After all, nothing but pathetic defeat awaits these barbaric natives. What other outcome can there be? Compared to the battlefield at the spiritual state, only one figure flew out of the godly palace. He wore fiery red armor and carried a huge sword on his back. While flying high up in the sky, he looked down and said with intense disdain, "Are you here to surrender?" He's the famous Sky Knight, Mr. Hex, the Knight of Furious Flame. Luther introduced, he's a top-tier master only next to the Morning Star of Burning Flame. Mr. Hex probably thinks that these barbaric natives don't deserve the efforts of Mr. Austin, the Morning Star of Burning Flame. From what I know, there are few level 8 masters on this land, but Mr. Austin has reached level 9. I'm afraid that he can subdue all these barbaric natives all by himself. At this moment, Nalan Hungwu stood on the bow of the spiritual ship. While wearing pure white clothes, his white hair was tied behind his head, and the black long sword on his belt was sheathed. He said mildly, "You should not be here." Instead of using the spiritual state language, he spoke the language of the Outlanders. Besides eating melon and drinking red tea every day in the shop, Jessica and her companions had taught them some spiritual spells, including the language inspiration spell. Ugh! This guy. At this moment, the young people including CIA and Joseph, other warriors and mages, and some members of the Golden Griffin Knight Legion who had been watching the spiritual spell image projection were surprised. They could feel the lofty pride in the succinct words even through the spiritual spell image projection. Damn, this man sounds elegant and has depth. The people watching on the square froze. The elf girl named Sala blinked and wondered, are these natives, really barbaric natives? I shouldn't be here. Hex, the Knight of Furious Flame, frowned slightly and suddenly snickered. I think it's you who shouldn't be here. If you're not here to surrender to us, then are you here to seek your death? You use swords. Nalan Hungwu glanced at the huge sword on Hex's back. Hex froze and then said after a long pause, are you blind? I carry a sword on my back. Of course, I use swords. Nalan Hungwu said mildly, do you know what the essence of swords is? These people's words are so deep. At this moment, Sala thought that these people of the continent of immortal relics were mysterious and elegant, instead of being ignorant, filthy and low as Luther had described. What's happening? At this moment, the lofty existences in St. Hein's Grand Palace were also surprised. Why aren't these people afraid? Instead of being afraid, he even has time to ask about the essence of swords? I think Mr. Klaus, the Sword Saint, will be the best person to answer this question. The old man who was nicknamed the World Mage said. At this moment, Hex said, the sword in my hand was born to kill enemies of the Judgment Godly Palace. Only sincere people can reach the pinnacle stage of swordsmanship. Insincere people don't deserve to talk about swords. Nalan Hungwu looked at Hex and said, you're not sincere. Hiss. Sala touched her thin sword on her belt and thought, this old man's words make good sense. Even the knights of the Golden Griffin Knight Legion who were standing around Sala began to see the barbaric natives in a new light. They were surprised that he could speak so wisely. Damn! You stole all the thunder. Watching the scene behind the crowd, Mr. Fang was speechless. Haha! Hex drew out the huge fiery red sword on his back with a cold smile. If you think that you can talk us out of the war, dream on. Then, his face darkened as he thought, this native isn't even at level 8, and he dares to lecture me? Do you know what level 8 is? Hex said slowly, it's the pinnacle stage for humans. So many years passed, and even this little guy Hex has also reached level 8. In St. Hein's Grand Palace, a projected image said, I guess he has reached it in recent years. He was baptized in godly power last year. If he borrows the godly power, he can reach level 8, a priest explained. He hacked down his huge fiery red blade with vicious force. Instant strike? This is Mr. Hex instant strike. Many knights exclaimed on White Pigeon Square. The instant strike that can chop a level 8 magical beast in half. My goodness! However, in the next moment, they saw Nalan Hungwu move his feet slightly, and his body swayed to one side a little bit. The huge blade missed him by a narrow margin. White-haired and white-clothed, Duke Nalan stood where he was with his hands clasped behind his back, looking as if he hadn't moved at all. My goodness! What just happened? Gasps sounded from White Pigeon Square. CIA, Ron, and the other young people covered their mouths with their hands, and they couldn't believe their eyes. How could it be? How did he manage that? Oh! That was amazing! Even the figures hiding in the dark corner of the square were stupefied at this scene. He dodged it. However, this sword strike wasn't over. With a twist of his waist, Hex slashed back his huge sword with horrifying force. However, Nalan Hungwu seemed to have anticipated his move. Almost at the same time when Hex slashed out, Nalan Hungwu began to turn his body. When the sword came, Nalan Hungwu dodged with perfect timing. Everyone on White Pigeon Square was shocked, and their mouths opened in a perfect O shape. Sala! I told you many times. When we're on a mission, Lance walked up with disapproval on his face. No. Captain. Look. Sala pointed at the spiritual spell image projection but couldn't describe what she was seeing. Look where? It's nothing to look at. War? It is just a war. Lance turned his head but froze when he saw the spiritual spell image projection. What did he see? He saw that Hex, the Knight of Furious Flame, couldn't even touch an old man's clothes after using several sword techniques. Who is this guy? Which nation is this Grand Master from? Lance asked immediately. This is, Sala couldn't believe this, and she stared at the battle with widened eyes as she said, he's from another continent, the weak and helpless nation that the Judgment Godly Palace is invading. Lance looked at the projected visuals before him. What did I say? Weak and helpless? How can any weak force be like this? Who's this guy? Lance asked immediately, is he the most powerful figure among them? In St. Hein's Grand Palace, a priest murmured, is this barbaric native really at level 7? He yelled in his mind, as the Judgment Godly Palace that has all kinds of prophecies and miracles from gods, shouldn't it be our level 6 masters beating up your level 7 masters? But now? Good. Very good. Hex stopped his attacks at this moment and said, I thought that this was a boring expedition and didn't expect to meet anyone who could force me to use my true power. At this time, the miraculous golden pattern on Hex's forehead flashed with dazzling light. Engulfed in the dazzling light, his entire body turned radiant and flashy. A horrifying force spread from his forehead to all over his body. It wasn't a power that humans could have, it seemed to come from gods. Before such horrifying power, anyone would feel humble and tiny. Supported by that horrifying force, Hex hovered in the air, and his golden hair fluttered in the wind. The air around him seemed to be distorted by that terrifying force. Do you see how big the gap between us is? Hex said with a smirk. I'll show you what is true speed. This man in fiery red armor moved his body and suddenly vanished before Nalan Hung Guyu. In the next moment, he turned into a series of blurry shadow around Nalan Hung Guyu, moving as fast as the wind. At this moment, Nalan Hung Guyu looked grim and serious. He could feel that his opponent's strength far surpassed his after that force joined in. This man's strength was so high that it was unclimbable. This gap of strength perhaps couldn't be bridged with skills and techniques. Suddenly, Nalan Hung Guyu's expression changed, and his body slightly shifted to one side. His opponent's blade drew over his chest, making a smooth cut in his chest. Then, red blood flowed out from the wound. So fast! The audience on White Pigeon Square exclaimed again. This speed was inhumane. Like a horrifying fiery red rain of sword energies and meteors, Hex attacked continuously. Could anyone block attacks that were at such high speed? Even Grand Masters couldn't detect the movements of the sword, let alone the eyes of ordinary people. On top of that, it was impossible to match such a speed. However, at this moment, Nalan Hung Guyu's sword slashed out. His sword turned into a black light beam like a black lightning flash. It was fast, but it was no match for his opponent's horrifying speed. Besides, the gap in their strength was too bigger. Before the storm-like sword strikes of his opponent, Nalan Hung Guyu's black sword looked like a pure light beam. It was so impeccable and pure that it contained no variations in it. Perhaps it just didn't need any variations. When the sword slashed out, blood spewed into the air. At this moment, even some of the existences in St. Hein's Grand Palace stood up subconsciously. The sword saint named Klaus also stared at the sword strike intently. If it were said that Hex wasn't using the strength of humans, then this sword strike didn't belong to humans. It was like a sword strike that an immortal used. Although your strength has increased, it isn't your own strength, which means that you can't control it. You will only expose more weaknesses because of it. A sword came from the west, flying immortal beyond the heavens. Even if he couldn't fully understand it, any bit of inspiration was crucial. Nalan Hongyu might not have reached that realm, but he had seen it and obtained some inspirations from it. His sword had almost reached that perfect realm. These people of this mysterious and ancient nation are elegant and powerful, and their swordsmanship is philosophical and poetic. This was the impression that these barbaric natives left on the minds of the people of the Laura continent. Are we really looking at the barbaric natives? Did you see that sword technique clearly? With borrowed horrifying godly power, Hex created a curtain of sword shadows with blazing flames, but his attacks were shattered by one clear sword slash from his opponent. The knights, elves, warriors, mages, and young people of the Morning Light Empire on the White Pigeon Square were shocked. How come this is different from the battles that we watched before? With Hex's terrifying speed, strength, and flames that are empowered by godly power, he can easily fight 10,000 warriors alone. But you guys, destroyed all that with a sword strike? Something is wrong. It didn't make sense. They were stupefied with shock and disbelief. This battle turned their understanding of battles upside down. This sword slash looked random and didn't make sense, but true masters knew its power and the outcome before it landed. They saw a horrifying control of strength after everything at that moment was known to Nalan Hongyu. He didn't need eyes to see and ears to hear to achieve this granular control. Seeing a tiny movement from his opponent, such as a shift of a foot or a wave of a sword, Nalan Hongyu would instantly know how to use the next sword strike. Regardless of how fast Hex moved around Nalan Hongyu and which angle he attacked from, Nalan Hongyu would use a perfect sword strike to counter. I'm surprised. The projected image of an old man who was emitting radiant light said, Mr. St. Heinz, we might not be able to win the war as easily as we expected. Obviously, Hex lost this battle due to his opponent's superb combat skills. The old man who was nicknamed the World Mage said, but I'm not worried. After all, skills take hundreds of years to master but can't extend people's lifespan or strengthen their force. It takes everything backward. This old man has lived hundreds of years but only reached level 7. I'm afraid that he's in the last years of his life. Powerful strength could extend one's lifespan. With prolonged life, people could cultivate and reach higher realms. These people also practiced skills, but in their eyes, skills were just auxiliary abilities while one obtained more strength. After all, one couldn't block a destructive spiritual spell with only techniques. It was why these forces were called godly nations and godly palaces while the Morning Light Empire, the nation of skills, was only an empire. Oh! Mr. Hex was so careless. At this moment, Luther hurried to explain. Believe me, it was just an accident. For laymen, it indeed looked like an accident. In the spiritual spell visual projection, Luther continued, I hope that others won't repeat the careless mistake that Mr. Hex made. Anyway, these barbaric natives are not good for nothing. Yes, that's what has happened. These barbaric natives are fearless. Maybe they think that their good luck will continue. Luther said viciously, I think we must teach them a lesson. Was it just an accident? Oh. No. Naive elf girl Sala began to worry again. Obviously. Mr. Hex was defeated too easily. A knight of the Golden Griffin Knight Legion said, I, too, think that it was just an accident. Don't you think so, Ms. Helen? Helen answered distractedly, maybe, even if his victory had an element of luck, he is still very powerful since he could defeat the mighty Mr. Hex. CIA argued. At this moment, the audience on White Pigeon Square were divided into several groups with different opinions. The Knights of the Night Legion thought that the barbaric natives wouldn't be so lucky anymore. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to rescue Ms. Jessica and the others. The group led by elf girl Sala thought that there might be an element of luck in the victory, but they believed that the battle was won with some high-level techniques. While these people argued, Luther changed the scene of the spiritual spell visual projection. They had set one end of the spiritual spell visual projection in each of the 3 battlefields, and Luther could choose any of them to show to the audience. Obviously, he had seen something he liked on another battlefield and immediately changed the scene. It was something that the godly palace wanted to show to the audience as well. Oh! Look! Mr. Land of Thorns has ordered a full-scale charge on the barbaric natives who are determined to resist us. But this time, they won't be so lucky. They could see white godly light transform into destructive light beams while they crashed down from the sky. Pale blue lights lit up around the spiritual ships of spiritual state cultivators. When the white godly light beams crashed onto the pale blue spiritual lights around the spiritual ships, the ships shook violently under the huge force. Meanwhile, the spiritual state began to fight back. While artifact masters in Zhuhua City and Half City were busy preparing, the cultivators of the spiritual state hadn't been idle. At the end of the Legend of the Sword and Fairy, Li Xiaoao returned to Shu Mountain faction and studied many things from the ancient scrolls. With the artifact making and array planning methods that they learned from the game, the cultivators strengthened and improved the defensive and offensive arrays on their spiritual ships. Since the ancient families on the spiritual state were the most powerful forces on this continent, they were not at an obvious disadvantage in this battle. Meanwhile, many warriors riding all kinds of mounts flew out from the huge stone palace in the sky like locusts, dashing in all directions. Instantly, they almost filled the whole sky and blocked out most of the light. Behind the riders were rows of white-robed mages who were hovering in the sky. The most eye-catching were fire-spitting huge dragons which looked like the horned dragons that Gabriel and the others rode, but these beasts were fiercer than horned dragons. Of course, there were other rare beasts as well. One golden armored knight was riding a magnificent lion with wings. This knight didn't attack. Instead, he watched the battle quietly from the high sky. At the order of the golden armored knight, the locust-like legion of knights swept down from the sky like a huge gloomy cloud under the cover of many godly light beams. If the ultimate West Realm was lost, the next would be the spiritual state or the entire continent of immortal relics. Attack! Furious roars could be heard despite the howling of violent gusts in the sky. The cultivators of the spiritual state had had little dealings with warriors of the ultimate West Realm, but seeing the devastation of the land and the ruined city, the brave character of the spiritual state burned with fury as their blood boiled. After all, they lived on the same continent, and they guarded another continent in a virtual world together. Instantly, at least 1,000 people charged into the enemies engulfed by raining light beams. Where are the Grand Masters? As a Grand Master player, Zhang Xian raised his fist and yelled. Where are the Silent Eyes? Zhongwu roared, and all the Silent Eye players on the spiritual ships answered him. A sword may conquer the flesh, but only your heart may conquer the mind. My eyes are in deep sleep, and my heart is my new eye. Not only slayers but all other classes including noblesses, dragon fists, and swift masters joined the fight. Many figures swarmed out like a terrifying wave from the spiritual ships. Space-time cutter shatters the world. Every creature is a tiny ant under the sword. Radiant gunfire. Rain of 3,000 bullets. Gales. Move at my order. Charge. Where are my 8 million fighters? For some time now, a legend about 8 million fighters in Dungeon Fighter Online had been circulating around the shops. TL note, this is a reference to DFO in China. At its peak, there were 8 million concurrent players on the servers. Although there were only tens of thousands of players, when Zhongwu flew across the sky and let out a furious roar, many resonant shouts answered him, and it sounded like a tsunami. The world shook as if everything in the world was terrified by this force. While the Night Legion of the Thorn Flower family from the Judgment Godly Palace swarmed down like dark clouds, the huge army of fighters of the spiritual state surged up like turbulent waves in the ocean. The fighters of the ultimate West Realm were the first to charge, but the demon clan of the Snow Nation, who moved later, overtook them. Crown Prince Zhang Xian pierced a Knight of Judgment Godly Palace with his black patterned treasure sword. The spiritual spell visual projection of the Judgment Godly Palace zoomed out, and the audience could only see many people flying across the sky like ants. They could distinctly see that two groups of spiritual state fighters plunged into their enemies. These people aren't afraid of being killed. Luther was struck by fear while watching the battle through the spiritual spell visual projection. Surrounded by many enemies, Gabriel seemed to have forgotten about death, and his armor was covered in ugly wounds. In the grand palace that was hovering in the sky, a chained figure was pushed out on a cart, and this dying man was revealed to be their lord. Attack! At this moment, even the mild-tempered Luo Piaoling roared in fury. Zhongwu slashed out his sword and shot out giant spiritual swords one after another, sending groups of knights flying. A series of roars sounded around him. Mountain-shattering strike. Saber-drawing hack. Fierce dragon sky strike. In the chaotic battle, sword energies looked like lightning flashes while sword lights flashed in the sky. The fierce and violent techniques seemed to have triggered TNT and caused an explosion in the middle of people. In tattered armor and with a hole through his belly, Gabriel leaped down from his horned dragon. Then, he charged toward the direction of the Grand Palace without fear. This man, is he truly not afraid of death? Not only Luther, but many figures in St. Heinz Grand Palace intently stared at this figure on the battlefield. Covered in blood and with a few grey mysterious crystals in hand, Gabriel leaped up and landed on the huge black dragon that was ridden by a knight who was wearing luxurious golden armor. Direct. Even from the distance, the audience could clearly see the blood-covered figure among the legion of knights of the Thornflower family. What are we seeing? This madman dashed to Direct, one of the most powerful elite members of the Thornflower family. Besides the 6 knights and the 3 people wearing black priest robes who were all standing motionlessly high in the sky, the man wearing golden armor was the most eye-catching figure here. You are asking for it? Diretta's face darkened, surprised that this severely injured man dared to charge at him. I'll take your head then. Diretta hacked out with his huge sword. Boom! Gabriel blocked it with his sword, but the huge momentum and the sword technique allowed his opponent's giant sword to almost chop off his shoulder. The huge sword was stuck in his bones. Now, Direct could only see the attacker's blood-red eyes. The crazy eyes looked like that of a demon. Then, he saw the madman taking a vicious step forward. Fury exploded. Violent and bloody presence exploded like a huge cannonball. Direct felt a violent force crashing onto his body like a huge mountain-shattering hammer. Instantly, he was engulfed by the horrifying blood-red fury energy. Impossible! Many people exchanged a look of horror after seeing this scene and that figure who was covered in blood. Like raindrops and locusts, people fell from the sky at every moment, but most of them were knights of the Thornflower family. In the close-range battles, the combat force of these people, who they saw as barbaric natives, far surpassed their imaginations. Seeing this scene, Luther was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, St. Heinz still looked indifferent and cold. Because at this moment, Luther received the order to change the screen to another spiritual spell visual projection. Meanwhile, the man who was called Land of Thorns and was wearing a luxurious black robe waved his hand and said, "Unleash the Dark Judgment Legion." A puff of black smoke appeared beside him and then condensed into a man who was hidden in black armor. Land of Thorns stared at the battlefield coldly and saw that no knights dared to get close to Zhongwu. He pointed at Zhongwu and made the cutthroat gesture. The man in black armor beside him instantly vanished. Chapter 598 With my real eyes gone, my mind's eye opens. It seems that Mr. Heinz has underestimated them this time. Ha ha ha. The middle-aged man wearing a luxurious fiery red robe and a tall hat sat across from Heinz. Anyway, this war isn't boring anymore. At this moment, even the princess sitting beside St. Heinz didn't look bored, but her tone was still lazy. But the Thornflower family must show one of their hidden cards now. Obviously, she knew about the hidden cards of the forces under the Judgment Godly Palace. The moment she said that, they saw the Land of Thorns sending out the Dark Judgment Legion. As mentioned before, there were professions similar to the assassins of the Underground Council. For example, some forces trained and kept scouts and killers. They used these forces to handle things that they wanted to keep secret. The Dark Judgment Legion was one of such forces. The Thornflower family had trained this force for a long time. The team consisted of 3 level 8 Dark Judgment Knight captains who acted as leaders and 12 level 7 Dark Judgment Knights. This time, the Thornflower family brought 2 Dark Judgment Knight captains and 6 level 7 Dark Judgment Knights to this war. It meant that the Thornflower family brought more than half of its military force to this war on the continent of Immortal Relics, showing their determination to win. Due to the blockage at the Heavenly Abyss Sea, they couldn't move some powerful weapons into this land, which was another reason why they brought such powerful legions with them. However, they were very confident in the abilities of their legions. On the battlefield where fierce fights went on, Zhongwu waved his sword, which wasn't long but emitted bright lights, overpowering most of his enemies. Most people couldn't handle his strikes. However, at this moment, a streak of extremely strange presences floated into the sky above the battlefield. He looked around carefully but couldn't see anything unusual, as if he was having a hallucination. An old man wearing a white priest robe and a white hat said slowly, disguised in shadows, "They judge and remove all sins." This barbaric native is not aware of the danger, which means that the Dark Judgment Knight Legion will take another soul. These barbaric natives don't know that they are as bright as lights in the dark night to the Thornflower family, and they themselves are blind in the darkness. The moment he said it, they saw Zhongwu, who was battling one knight, suddenly stop pursuing his opponent for some reason. Then, he moved to one side confidently. A pitch-black dagger slashed across the space before Zhongwu's chest. Then, a figure appeared before him silently while the dagger slashed down extremely close to Zhongwu's chest, cutting open the pure white robe near the location of his heart. If Zhongwu had dodged a little bit slower, it was obvious what would have happened. Instantly, the old man who had spoken smugly in St. Hein's Grand Palace was embarrassed, and his face turned red as if someone had slapped him. He dodged it. They all froze. In their eyes, this native warrior was at most in the pinnacle stage of level 7 and not level 8 yet. However, the assassin who went after him was a level 8 master. An level 8 master can't assassinate a level 7 master. Could it be? They immediately thought of Hex in the previous battle. Could it be that this barbaric native warrior has the same combat techniques as the barbaric native in the previous battle? However, St. Heinz and Land of Thorns Wilson both looked cold and unmoved by this. Land of Thorns Wilson had sent over more than one Dark Judgment Knight. 2 level 8 knights and 3 level 7 knights were here to deal with Zhongwu. One of the 2 level 8 fighters must borrow godly power to reach this level, but the other had reached this realm with his own strength. In contrast, Zhongwu was only at the pinnacle stage of level 7. The moment Zhongwu dodged the attack, he suddenly felt a chilly presence coming at his neck. Without thinking, he took 2 steps back. Chilliness touched his neck, and a tiny line of blood appeared. If the dagger cut a little deeper, it would have slit open his throat. Cold sweat trickled down from Zhongwu's forehead. At this moment, he felt tremendous pressure coming from the sneak attacks and the invisible enemies. There was more than one assassin. The moment Zhongwu narrowly dodged the attack that was aiming for his throat, he felt an intense murderous spirit coming from behind. He quickly bent forward, and he ducked, dodging 2 pitch-black daggers which swept into the air just above his back. Before he could breathe, 2 deadly black blades shot toward his rib cage from the 2 sides. Zhongwu didn't even feel the movement of air around him. In the spiritual spell visual projection, they saw Zhongwu was attacked from all directions by the strikes from shadows. The pitch-black daggers flashed toward him silently. Despite his swift dodges, several wounds appeared on Zhongwu's body. Blood dripped out drop by drop. It was a terrifying sight. He 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 he, a series of laughter came from the void. It sounded like this person was mocking him. A man wearing black armor stood in the void not far from Zhongwu, but no one could see him, including Zhongwu. They hid in the shadows, they were killers in the darkness. Obviously, it seemed like Zhongwu couldn't last much longer. The Dark Judgment Knights, the existences hiding in shadows, retreated. They didn't leave. Instead, they were preparing for the next wave of storm-like attacks to get the kill. It seemed like a desperate presence was born in the peace before the storm. Castellan Zone. Standing on the spiritual ship, Zhang Hao, the Vice Academy Master of Heavenly Academy, turned grim at the scene and was about to fly over and help. In the blink of an eye, a knight blocked him. This knight was one of the 6 knights who had been watching the battle outside the godly palace and didn't move before. You are seeking death. The Tang family master had just dashed out when another knight flew down from the high sky and blocked his path. Obviously, no one could come to Zhongwu's rescue. When the Dark Judgment Knights moved, they must return with their enemies' heads. Land of Thorns Wilson was playing with a ruby ring on his finger. He glanced this way at the battle with a sneer on his face. Obviously, he had expected the interference of these people and had been prepared. Even if you have insane techniques, you can't use them in such a situation. Seeing this scene, Hematon, the world mage, nodded and said, "It's why I said that practicing techniques is attending to trifles and neglecting essentials." The moment he said it, they saw Zhongwu taking out a black band. Under the astonished gazes of everyone in St. Hein's Grand Palace, he covered his eyes with the band. What's he going to do? At this moment, only that shadow killer noticed the great difference in Zhongwu, the barbaric native warrior who had been at their mercy. With my real eyes gone, my mind's eye opens. Suddenly, the Dark Judgment Knights sensed a powerful and solid murderous spirit sweeping toward and corroding their bodies like pervasive chilly air. Murderous wave. Wave. By doing this, it felt like this man had delivered himself to his enemies with his hands and feet tied. In the high sky covered by gloomy clouds, cold winds swept across the snowy land of the ultimate West Realm. They saw the warrior who they regarded as a barbaric native holding a short saber emitting radiant spiritual light in his hand. With his eyes covered by the black band, he stood in the air quietly, letting the gusts flutter his robe against his body. Right now, he looked like a weak old man who had given up resistance. A weird presence floated past him. One must look very closely to see a trace of darkness with the same color as the gloomy sky floating in the air. Completely silent, they seemed like ghosts who were hiding in the dark night. A dangerous aura started to spread while 4 pitch-black daggers shot toward Zhongwu's vital parts from 4 directions this time. The attacks were faster and more vicious. However, before their daggers came close, a strange white shadow rose behind Zhongwu. This attack appeared at the perfect moment as if he had anticipated their attacks instead of being sneak attacked. These assassins didn't know that in Zhongwu's mind, their intense murderous spirit and energy waves hidden in the dark were as obvious as bright lights in darkness. In the dark world that existed in Zhongwu's senses, the energy waves behind him moved more violently. Azura wave radiation. Before the explosion reached them, the existences hiding in the shadows felt like they were struck by turbulent waves. A huge force sent them flying forward as if a volcano had erupted. They found that they were shaken out of the shadows by the weird force, and they were completely exposed to the whole world. On top of that, they discovered that a powerful suction force drew them together. The attack didn't end there, this was only the beginning. While they were shaken out of their stealth and lost their balances, they saw that Zhongwu slashed out his short sword which transformed into several surges of huge and invisible spiritual swords, leaving them no space to dodge. They were shocked. Under the influence of the Heavenly Academy, warriors of the spiritual state mostly focused on the cultivation of Qi. Long-range attacks with sword energies such as Spirit Crescent were not difficult for them, they could use them without much practice since they had similar techniques before. Obviously, there were experts in different fields. Zhongwu was a master in this area. Otherwise, he wouldn't have mastered these techniques so soon. Zhongwu slashed out his short sword, and a heated red flame shot out, following the trajectory of many ice blades. The ice and fire mingled, bursting into a wave of radiant sword energies in the sky. Spirit Crescent. Ice Wave Sword. Fire Wave Sword. The sword slashed out, and its great sword energies instantly condensed into a huge saber, followed by the ultimate combat techniques that Zhongwu mastered. Many surges of horrifying sword energies instantly engulfed the area where the assassins were. Everyone watching the battle stared at the scene in astonishment. With his eyes covered and strange light runes rotating around him, this barbaric native warrior had transformed his murderous spirit into visible lights that were emitting from his body. He looked like an Asura who was standing high in the heavens. Instantly, 4 of the elite Dark Judgment Knights died. The Dark Judgment Knights who came to this war lost half of their forces. The remaining 4 knights found that they were each chased by a surge of sword energy. With great precision, each sword energy followed its target unerringly regardless of how they tried to dodge. The lofty audience in St. Heinz Grand Palace watched as the Dark Judgment Knights were being hunted down by the barbaric native whose eyes were covered. Covered in pitch-black light armor, they exposed nothing but their eyes to the air. With short swords or daggers in hand, they emitted chilly and deadly presence. With your eyes covered, how did you do this? The shadow killer stared at Zhongwu intently. He couldn't imagine how his opponent had blocked his killing strike. He was infuriated most by the fact that they had suppressed this man while his eyes were open, but they were now pressured by him while his eyes were covered. You mean this? While stroking his beard, Zhongwu thought for a moment and said, I've played as a blind man for such a long time that I don't know how to fight with my eyes open. Pu. The shadow killer spewed out a mouthful of blood. The high-level officials of Judgment Godly Palace sitting in St. Heinz Grand Palace were at a loss for words. They were livid, and their faces almost turned green. This barbaric native. Reckless. Absolutely reckless. A white-robed priest yelled furiously. St. Heinz stared at the battlefield coldly. Obviously, the Thornflower family was more powerful than this. Only the Thornflower family master had more hidden cards than what these barbaric natives could imagine. Inhaling deeply, St. Heinz turned his eyes to another battlefield. He had waited for the Dark Judgment Knights of the Thornflower family to come up with better hidden cards. But now, he decided to ignore them to not feel agitated. In fact, some of the classes in Dungeon Fighter Online didn't have so many restrictions as they seemed to have. For example, Berserkers, a subclass of male slayers, looked normal on usual occasions. However, when they got furious, excited, or were experiencing a mental collapse, they would turn into crazy demons and obtain great power at the price of blood. At this moment, on another battlefield, Gabriel had almost dashed onto the Stone Palace all by himself. At the entrance in the center of the Stone Palace, Land of Thorns was only flanked by 1 knight and 1 black-robed prophet. Hee. Look at this guy. He has reached his limit after sending Direct flying. But now, he is seeking death by coming to a Sky Knight. This black-armored knight was also riding a huge dragon which was much larger and fiercer than Gabriel's horned dragon. Chapter 600 How come we can't watch the battles? While his fingers opened, a blood-colored vortex began to slowly take shape. The moment the blood-colored vortex was formed, the black-armored knight suddenly felt that the huge dragon beneath him was flying toward Gabriel against its will. Bloody Twister! The horrifying blood-colored vortex could immobilize anything and seal any force before it. If anything were sucked into it, there was no getting away. You are seeking death. As a lofty Sky Knight, this black-armored knight was furious that he was challenged by a young man who had barely reached level 7. He slashed out his sword viciously, and a huge sword energy flew out, intending to cut Gabriel into 2 halves. Light Shadow Strike. Another sword energy crashed down from the sky and smashed into the sword energy unleashed by the black-armored knight. Colorless crystal dust scattered in the wind, and the grey dust seemed to show the world what a powerful force it had unleashed. Sia and Luo Piaoling had battled their way to this place as well. Boom! The ripples of the surging sword energy spread out like a storm, and a bloody light struck down with vicious force as strong winds blew by. As a sad howl sounded, the skull of the huge dragon that the black-armored knight was riding on was shattered by the powerful strike, and blood sprayed everywhere. "You are seeking your deaths." Looking extremely dignified with the huge sword in his hand, the black-armored knight activated the golden patterns between his eyebrows as he shouted, "You dare to challenge me, godly Punisher Ode? You'll be turned into ashes by the godly light." He was the best out of the 6 Sky Knights. If he borrowed godly power, he could reach level 9. The horrifying force spread out. Even the ground couldn't withstand this force and cracked open. Good. Good. In the Grand Palace, the lofty existences nodded repeatedly and said, "This little guy has also reached level 9. They dare to come to this place. These barbaric natives will pay for their audacity." An old man wearing a priest robe said mildly, "I seem to foresee these ignorant barbaric natives being crushed like ants." However, the moment he said it, a middle-aged man in a bright blue robe floated over with a thick scroll in his hands. On the chest of his robe was an embroidered golden cross. He asked, "Godly power?" Although the ultimate West Realm mainly produced warriors, it didn't mean that there weren't any cultivators among them. The cultivator chanted in a low voice, and faint lights began to emit from these warriors' weapons. "Valor blessing." Then, another light fell on Gabriel's head. "Blessing of dawn." This wasn't the end. Soon, they saw another light landing on Gabriel's head. "Revenge of light." Then, "Archangel's blessing." "Source of life." "Wind of holy healing." Lights flashed on Gabriel, Luo Piaoling, and Sia one after another. When the middle-aged man stopped chanting the blessings with a cross in his hands, the 3 gathered and emitted extremely powerful presences. "May the holy light bless you." With a long chant, the middle-aged man in the bright blue robe finally finished casting spells. "What's this?" Everyone stared at the scene dumbfoundedly. Where did these barbaric natives get this stuff? Ha! With a furious roar, Gabriel closed his left hand, and the congealed blood slowly moved down his arm and condensed into a new sword in his hand. He. With an unintelligible roar, this fighter who was only at level 7 charged toward the knight who had reached level 9 with the help of godly power. With everything of the warriors of Ultimate West Realm, attack! Sia and Luo Piaoling roared and charged forward viciously. These people's battle roars seemed to ignite the fire on the whole battlefield. Let's turn to another battlefield that we haven't watched yet. Luther finally turned the spiritual spell visual projection to the battlefield in the Morning Star Sea realm, but they were astonished by what they saw. The cultivator army of the Morning Star Sea realm had begun fighting the Outland army in close range. A woman wearing a green dress strolled on the battlefield as if she was taking a walk, and before her was a level 8 golden armored knight. The moment the golden armored knight struck out his sword, the audience saw a white light flash by. Then, a destructive and demonic power erupted. Release plus devil trigger. In the blink of an eye, this woman withdrew the demonic power, and the level 8 knight looked as if a truck that weighed several tons had run over his body. He died instantly. Oh! This is impossible. The spiritual spell visual projection was instantly turned to another direction. A series of hysterical laughter resonated on the battlefield. A woman had transformed her murderous spirit into a sharp saber while demonic shadows danced behind her. The murderous spirit that only belonged to demons permeated the whole battlefield. Blood splashed into the air while the saber danced around. One knight fell to the ground after another like harvested wheat straws. The demonic power had been Shui Xianyun's nightmare, but it was now her greatest source of power. Meanwhile, not far from her, a figure in a black robe flew up into the air. Below him, blood gushed out, turning the ground into a pool of blood. The blood turned into tornadoes and sharp blades, even making this place into a horrifying bloody hell. Many terrifying techniques of blood, ice, and flames spread out on the battlefield like lotuses made of blood and fire. They looked demonic but extremely dazzling. Oh! No! This can't be real! Seeing this, Luther stammered and then immediately turned the spiritual spell visual projection to another battlefield. This time, he finally found something to his liking. In the spiritual spell visual projection, several civilian warriors of the Zhuhua city shop were at the disadvantage as they were surrounded by several powerful knights armed with excellent weapons. It seemed like they couldn't last long. Oh! Look! There are indeed some grandmasters among the barbaric natives, but their overall strength is not great. While holding a cup of tea in his hand, Luther felt like his lips were so dry that they were about to crack. The moment he said it, a dark sword light flashed by sitting on White Pigeon Square. Sala, CIA and the others saw a short-haired young man who was about 30 years old. This man was holding a strange sword with dazzling lights. A sword energy flashed, looking like a huge dragon's mouth. Raging Dragon Slash. The knights who had been attacking the civilian warriors were sent flying high into the sky. It seemed like they had been hit by a train. Black Light Grand Master. He's Black Light Grand Master. One of the civilian warriors yelled in pleasant surprise. The short-haired young man lifted the lightsaber and roared, "Friends, grab your weapons and kick out the invaders." Luther spat out his tea. Water splashed onto the spiritual spell visual projection. Then, it turned black. "Hey!" Elf girl Sala stood up and shouted, "How come you stopped the visual projection?" "Ah!" A few other elves also stood up. Even the two assassins hiding in the darkness were also frustrated. "We are enjoying it. How come it was turned off?"